All right, good evening, everyone. Finance Committee meeting here tonight, September 27th. I'm just going to address the agenda items, and then we're going to roll right into the first item on the agenda. So we've got the representatives of New England Development Group to discuss financial impacts of the proposed redevelopment of NAS South Weymouth. Then we will review and vote on the warrant articles for a special town meeting. We'll cover any liaison reports that we might have. There is no correspondence. And then we'll discuss future meetings, which our next one will be likely right before town meeting at the school. So with that, if the representatives want to take the podium, and we can start with the first agenda item tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Tuig from New England Development. Behind me is Paul Sincotta, who will try to be sure that at least our technology works. And I was going to ask you, Mr. Chairman, we have a brief presentation about the project. It's not, I mean, finance is part of it. And with your permission, it's a presentation we actually gave to the selectmen earlier this week. It might be instructive for the Finance Committee, but obviously didn't want to be presumptive and present it and say, well, you know, that we just have some questions we want to answer. So up to you. I mean, we're happy to present it. We thought it might provide some interesting background for your committee, if that's okay. Well, as I mentioned, behind me, Paul Sincotta from New England Development, Tim Sullivan from Goulston Stores, who's worked on our zoning. Obviously, what's in front of town meeting is really focused on zoning. We're going to touch a little bit on zoning tonight, but it's just sort of part of the base and sort of where we are. We also thought it might be helpful if we did a couple minutes on sort of who we are. That might be helpful and sort of what our group is. We thought we'd talk a little bit about timeline. Well, what does that got to do with finance? But just to kind of put it in context where we are, what are we doing, we'll do that. A little bit about our master plan, so we'll touch on that. A little bit about zoning. I'm just going to do, Tim is here. He's got a much longer presentation on zoning. I don't think you really wanted, although it's riveting and very, very exciting. We're not going to do that tonight. Touch a little bit about infrastructure because it does matter. And, you know, certainly here in Abington, issues of water and sewer and transportation do matter. Touch a little bit about that. Open space because it's sort of a tenet of how we have sort of developed our thinking on the base and what we want to redevelop. So we're going to touch on that. Obviously touch on fiscal and then how we saw a little bit of benefits of our vision. Who we are though, New England Development, been around about 40 years. Founded by Steve Karp, who is currently our chairman, and he was our founder. Originally, New England Development was a regional shopping center company. We developed most of the Simon malls that you go into in New England were developed by New England Development. We did it because, and the reason we were able to do it is New England is a very parochial place. If you're not from here, we don't like you necessarily. And it just became something that Steve actually did the first enclosed mall in Massachusetts. Back up in Danvers, the Liberty Tree Mall was the first enclosed mall. And for about 20 years, New England Development did that. When I first started as a lawyer, I was very, very young in the late 1980s, and I was doing regional shopping centers and Solomon Pond Mall and Emerald Square Mall and a bunch that you go in the region. And that's what our company did. About 20 years ago, we sort of looked out and said, the regional mall business is changing. You know, it just isn't the same. We used to have, and I'll date myself, we had a Jordans and you had a Filene's and you had a JCPenney and then you built the mall around it. That all changed. So we sort of morphed into doing more mixed-use projects. We morphed into doing residential. We went into hospitality and did that. We went into doing marinas and golf courses, project that you'll know. And Paul, if you turn back to it, if you wouldn't mind, I can probably just show you 3 quick images of some things that we did. The first one is right here. That's Cambridge Side. I started Cambridge Side in 1987, working with Steve. It was very creative at the time. It was 3 levels down, 3 levels up. Near the Charles River, right on the canal. We rebuilt the canal. We've had that property since 1987. If you go out there in about another 2 weeks, there's a 400,000 square foot lab building that you're going to see opening up 11 stories tall. It is where the Macy's used to be because things change. In that area, arguably one of the hotbeds of tech and innovation in pharmaceuticals, we sort of morphed about 5-6 years ago into doing a lot of pharmaceuticals and doing a lot of work with people in that industry. The Sears building, which they closed, Sears has gone the way of all things. They called us a few Decembers ago on December 9th and said, we're closing. We said, well, of course, you're going to stay open for Christmas. And they said, no, we're closing. That building will open in about 2 months as a 200,000 square foot lab building with retail in the base. We are still keeping our retail there in the first couple of floors. We have about 400,000 square feet of retail. We're also building a residential building there, a true mixed-use project of a couple million square feet. It's really a signature project that we've had and really been working on since 1987. Bottom left picture is Pine Hills. New Wing Development is not commonly associated with Pine Hills, but it is our development. About 3,000 acres, 3,000 homes, about 2,500 homes have been built. Very successful with the community, people love it, and that's sort of a planned community. Has some similarities to some of the things that may happen at the base. And then covered up by our little person there is Westwood University Station. If you know the Amtrak station up in Westwood, we bought that about 10 years ago. Paul and I worked on that, turned that into what it is today. We have Citizens regional headquarters are there. We have medical. We brought in Wegmans. We were the first people to bring Wegmans to Massachusetts. We have done 5 of the 6 Wegmans that are in Massachusetts. Turned that into a combination retail. We built housing there, about 650 units of housing there, really turned into a couple million square feet. I often talk about that when you talk about the base because it has amazing similarities to the base. It was a failed project that required a great deal of infrastructure that had been foreclosed on and actually taken over by the Irish government. Amazing to talk to the Irish government about a site in Westwood, Massachusetts. They sort of knew where the United States was, vague recollection of where Massachusetts might have been, had absolutely no idea where Westwood was, but they ended up with owning it because it was funded by Anglo-Irish Bank, which was taken over by the Irish government. So interesting stories. One theme here that you have is we develop a lot of things. We also hold a lot of things. We've, as I said, Cambridge site since 1987. Pine Hills we've been involved in for over 25 years. Westwood Station we've been involved in since we bought it in 2012. So that's a little bit of what we've probably developed, about 50 million, a little bit more than 50 million square feet. We have about 4 million square feet in development today of all kinds of different things. I put up here some of our key consultants, not that they're necessarily here tonight. Well, Tim is. This is a crowd we sort of travel with. Dumont Jenks, who does a lot of our site design, layout, Tetra Tech, who does a lot of site civil, Jeffrey Dirk on transportation from VII, and also RKG, who does a lot of our fiscal analysis. Originally ran into them because they mostly represent states, municipalities, but we've worked with them over the past few years. This is a partnership with Brookfield. You hear the Brookfield name here. Brookfield is not commonly known in this region. Brookfield really comes as high as New York. They're all over the world. They're, depending on the day, the first or the second largest real estate company in the world. They have about $250 billion worth of assets. They do a lot of interesting development opportunities. They were coming into New England. We've partnered with them on a couple of projects. This is a joint venture we have with them. They probably have under development 50 different planned communities, a lot of commercial space, office holdings, all kinds of different developments that Brookfield does. But that's sort of the players that you sort of have, and we, our joint venture, have been working on this.
Excuse me, John, when you say joint venture, what does that mean?
We share all the costs, all the development. We're partners. I have a common word. We're partners in it. We fund it together. We're going to, once we get the land fully entitled, we will build together. We think that we will probably self-develop with Brookfield some of the properties. Probably won't develop all of it. Not unlike what we did at Pine Hills, bring in a developer, who may have, we've got a lot of interest in the site, who may want to build a building. We may want to have a commercial building that someone else wants to do that we don't normally do, be that type of thing.
And are they active with you on this? Are they kind of a silent partner on this?
They're not silent. Robert was with us on the selectmen tonight, Robert
Okay.
Pierce, who's a representative from Brookfield. You'll see more of them as we get into sort of the vertical development.
Yeah.
Less of them, because they're not from Massachusetts, entitlement, it's different here. I mean, to try to explain to someone who isn't from Massachusetts what a town meeting is like, I mean, I've done that, and they kind of look at you like, wait a minute, everybody comes and they raise their hand, and they vote, how's that work, and everybody can talk. Most people who aren't from here don't have a clue. So we're taking all the lead on the entitlement, on going through all the permitting and development process. They're involved in it. We were actually all together today going through, sort of where we're at, our state filings, and so they're involved in that. But it's really our league. This is what we do.
Good.
So that's how we work together.
Thank you.
And again, they're highly resourced. I mean, they raise, to give you an idea, about $100 billion a year in their funds. So they're highly resourced, but again, they don't necessarily understand this market and the people, and so that's where we like them as people, and that's very important, and have similar values. So that's a little bit about Brookfield. See if there we go. So agenda, that's what I mentioned, we'll go through, and we'll touch on, and I'll try to walk through as quickly as possible so I don't take too much of your time of these items. A little bit of timeline. I think it is helpful to sort of just set the stage about where we're at, what we've been doing. So the first part of this year, and this just focuses on 2023, we had to do a redevelopment plan. The base has had a lot of redevelopment plans. It has failed 4 times. We had to do a new redevelopment. The last redevelopment plan was kind of silly. It was a redevelopment plan that said we're going to build 197 units of this, and we're going to build 187 units of this, and we're going to do it over 12 to 15 years. Great that you can have that kind of a crystal ball. It wasn't real. If you saw the model of the plan that they were going to do, it had man-made lakes, it had 20-story buildings. We jokingly call it the Dubai plan. We're not in Dubai. That's not how people live, and we didn't think that's what people are going to work in New England. This
Movie theaters, I think, too.
Lots of that.
10,000-seat sporting arena.
It had the little Fenway Park. All very, very interesting. Not real, but and that's why they spent $60 million and never actually developed anything. And ended up being foreclosed on. And that's what it was. So we did spend the beginning of the year working with the SRA. SRA, Southfield Redevelopment Authority. Your representative, Roger Woods, is here from Abington, working with them on developing a new redevelopment plan, developing new zoning. We get a vote on that from them in March formally, but we've spent months and months before that working with them to be able to do that. And also the technical studies here in Town Hall, about 2,000 pages of studies in the sense we had to study water, sewer, transportation, fiscal, and submit all that as part of what we did. So we sort of did that in March. Then we had to go to Weymouth. All of what we do is governed by a piece of legislation. Remember, this is a naval base. This is actually federal government. This is, and one of the things that is always hard and you struggle with is trying to explain, well, yeah, but that's part of Abington. It is, but it isn't. And it's controlled by a piece of legislation that created the SRA that allowed the towns to have input. But it's really, we've spent the last year and a half negotiating with the Navy about cleanup, use of funds. They're still owed money. We paid them in March of this year. What we have convinced the Navy to do, though, which is very different than the prior developers and where we've been for the last 10 years on this site, is they're taking the money that is being paid to them on an annual basis. They're allowing us to use that money to build a dewatering plant and to deal with PFAS. Everybody sort of heard of PFAS and Forever Chemicals. The base, no great surprise, it's got PFAS. Where do you find most of your PFAS? You find it in the foam that they use to fight in airports and the like where you have fuel and fuel spills. It's on the base. But what they've allowed to do is all the money that's owed to the Navy, we're actually designing with Weston and Sampson a new dewatering plant that we're going to build on the base to bring the PFAS levels to non-detectable levels. It's sort of a big thing with the Navy. It's not very exciting, it's not very sexy, but it's a big item that we'll spend a lot of time with. Weymouth, because of the legislation, we moved right to Weymouth as soon as we finished with the SRA. We did get the zoning, we got a unanimous approval from both their planning board and their council. We moved forward. The other thing we sort of did in that time frame is working with natural heritage. There's a lot of habitat on this site. The base of a bunch of what's in Abington, a lot of what's in Rockland, are turtle habitats and certain bird habitats. We had to deal with that. We have the second, let me get this right, we have the second largest population of eastern box turtles that are monitored in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on this site. So it's a big part of what we're doing to kind of correct and kind of deal with that. So you move from that, we did get that approval at the end of June. We moved right in July and September, preparing Abington and Rockland. We have been favorably recommended by the Abington Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. We're also, last night, we were favorably recommended by the Rockland Planning Board. So we have the Weymouth, and so now we're moving into our next phase, which is really Abington Town Meeting on October 14th, and then the Rockland Town Meeting on November 7th. At the same time, we're getting a MEPA filing ready. Now, MEPA is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. You have to file with the state. There have been many filings about the base on this site. We have to file about, what are you gonna do about water? What are you gonna do about sewer? You're gonna fix up the roads. We have to coordinate with MassDOT. We're getting all those filings ready, because what MEPA wants to see, what the state wants to see is get your local zoning and all that approved, moving forward with the communities, then do the state process, finish the state process. We think that's gonna be in 2024. Our goal is we wanna end up, the end of 2024, to have the entitlements to be able to move forward with a project on the base. So that's sort of what, we don't have all the answers yet. Some of our MEPA study will, and I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the technical issues in water and sewer, but that's what we're working on. So that's a little bit about timeline. This is the base. We have a kind of a long vision presentation, but this is the recent development on the base. But one thing I'd ask you to keep in mind, all this area that's disturbed, the runways, the taxiways, those are all still there. Most of Abington, and just to give you orientation, Route 18, T Station, this is the parkway that takes you out to 228. This is the Weymouth line, so everything north of this line is Weymouth. Rockland, which is all through here, and then this line here is Abington. And you can see the taxi, the runways, and this was actually one of the biggest hangars. You can still see the base for that. That's what's actually out on the base today. And you can see, we've been out there, it's about 1,274 homes, all of the development primarily focused here, some of it with the recplexes and things over there, but all in Weymouth. That's actually been developed. So we looked at this and said, okay, what's our idea about what we can do with this space? And just in a very summary way, really even going back and looking at pre-1940, what was out there in Huckleberry Hill and the farms that were there, one thing that became clear was a lot of northern open space, a lot of southern open space. We have a lot of turtle habitat and other things. This is the hangar, just for orientation, when you look off the parkway and see the hangar there. How could you take these runways, for example, and we call, this sounds a little corny, runways to greenways. The idea of it, and these runways are thousands of feet long and hundreds of feet wide. These are not small pieces. But if you think of, and our designer would do a much better job, but you think about that hangar, you think about that runway, think about Commonwealth Avenue, a place like that in Boston, where you have a wide open space, and in this particular case, probably some homes built around it, to create very walkable areas, very connected areas, to deal with how do you connect the north and the south, knowing that, as we saw in the last picture, most of this is pavement. When the base was flattened, and that's what it was, the federal government came in and flattened it, there's virtually no pitch on this base is flat. They disturbed 900 acres. 900 acres of pavement and other things. It's only a 1,400 acre site. But of course, that was preparing it for World War II, dirigibles, ultimately the Air Force. So our idea is how can you connect these spaces? Okay. Zoning, that's what's in front of you. Technically in front of the town meeting on October 14th. This is the zoning map. Got about 32 overlay districts. If anybody can understand the zoning code that has been written for the base and understand how these overlay districts work, Bob Luongo from Weymouth, and I know he's not from Abington, but he's a very experienced planner, been in a lot of communities who say, John, I got a whole box on the zoning. I don't know what it says. That's right, and we heard that from other people who tried to develop on the base and said, we can't figure this out. And again, this was an attempt to say, well, in this quadrant here, you can do exactly this type of use. If anybody's in the real estate business, if you try to say a tenant or a user, you have to go exactly there and fit into that trapezoid, and that's what the use is going to be. It doesn't work, and certainly doesn't work in a planned community. But there are certain things that we had to plan for. In the yellow that you see here, and these colors here, people have built homes, owned homes. You have to leave that zoning in place because they got mortgages and you got to leave them alone. Figure out what hasn't been developed and create a new overlay zone, which is really Article 7A. Leave most of the zoning in place, but go to one place where you can read the rules of the road about how do you develop on this base, and then create a system for how it could work. So this is the zoning map that we're looking at. Leaving the things that have already been developed, leave those areas alone, and everything else is in one zone, except for the open space. Ring the entire base in open space, so that you ring that to protect the perimeter, but you say in the center, I could build. Now that's just as the zoning. There are other restrictions. There are wetlands restrictions, there's natural heritage, turtle areas you can't really change, but that was the zoning theory. That's what we've taken through for originally for Weymouth, and now through Rockland and Abington. A little bit about zone. People talk about infrastructure. Thousands of pages of reports were filed. Probably there are three things we're going to touch on: water, sewer, and transportation. It's a lot to water. We call this map on the right-hand side our spaghetti plan. There are two potential water. This region has no water. This is not a surprise to anybody. It just doesn't. You have to figure out how you can bring water to the base, how can you bring water to the region. One of the reasons this base has always failed is everybody has looked at the increment. If I can get another 20,000 gallons of water, I'll build a building and I'll sell it to somebody and do that. If you look at it that way, it will fail again. You have to look at how can I solve the problem so I can actually build out the base. There's a $60 million default on this base. There's probably $50 million worth of bonds owed to the state on this base. You have to be able to develop the base. Doing one-off incremental development will not work and will not pay the debts that are there. I mean, that's a sort of basic finance. You have to do enough of a project that makes that work. So how do you solve the water? Weymouth has some water. Everything that you saw on the base a few minutes ago, Weymouth supplies the water for. Water, they have some additional water, but not enough to actually be able to develop the base. So we started working with Weymouth and working with the MWRA, and these are 8 different routes for the MWRA. One thing the MWRA has is they got lots of water. They literally throw over the transom every day 100 million gallons of water a day, because they don't have customers for it. Problem is the water is up here in the Blue Hills. So the water's got to come from the Blue Hills and get down towards the base to get into the system. Now, a couple of things. MWRA just passed a new ordinance that said for the next group of people who sign up, that's 20 million gallons, we're going to waive all the fees for the MWRA. That's always been a problem with MWRA, huge fees to collect. Good. You have a Speaker of the House, Mariano, who has worked on the base since he was elected in 1991, who would like to bring water to this region. Good. So you sort of have a political issue. You have a capacity. You have someone who can supply it. And so why do we have all these routes? There's really only 1 or 2 routes that work. But you literally looked at routes that, well, wait a minute, we got to run a pipe in front of the South Shore Plaza. How's that going to work? How many feet are we actually going to lay on a given day? Not too many. So that's why you start looking at, well, what if I ran it from Randolph and bring it around and bring it in? Obviously, a bunch of those get dismissed. But what we're studying, what we're filing as part of the state is, this is a potential solution to bring water to the region. A pipe that could handle north of 10 million gallons a day to bring down to the region. So that's what we're working with the MWRA. That was part of the original filings that were done. We're required by the state to study that. We don't have an answer yet, but here's a good piece of good news. Town of Weymouth City of Weymouth has concluded they need to do something because they don't have enough water for the next 10 years. So they've agreed to become and file for becoming a MWRA community. At the same time, with our support, the SRA is filing to become, as a joint applicant with Weymouth, an MWRA community to bring water to the base. There are issues, there are challenges. Primarily, we have to run through Quincy and Braintree. Great. We have to get agreements with Quincy and Braintree. That pipe is probably about an $80 million pipe. Not easy. Take a couple of years to do. Probably a couple of years of permits to do too. It's a challenge, but that's what we're focused on. The state has some interest in being sure that this region starts to get some water, so bringing the water down. Okay. So that's one solution on MWRA. The second solution we're looking at is Aquaria. Aquaria is a desalinization plant primarily controlled by the city of Brockton. It has a capacity, permanent capacity of about 5 million gallons a day. Brockton does not use all the water that the Aquaria plant produces, never has. The idea, matter of fact, Aquaria, which is a private company, is obligated to try to find additional customers. There is a pipe from the city of Brockton at Peaceful Meadows, and I don't want to start calling it Hornstra now, anybody who knows that, because I'm just not going to. However, there's a 36-inch pipe on Route 18, straight shot to the base, that would supply the water for this area. So we're also working with City of Brockton and Aquaria about the opportunity, could we bring water up to the base? Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna guess it runs down the middle of the road that they just widened.
It would come straight up 18 most of the way and then cut off and come through the back of the base. Yes, it would. And like all things, some of the things we were able to anticipate, like when they were, before they did the final pavement for 18, we actually went to the state and we helped the SRA fund some sewer pipe improvements and some other pipes to service the base. We took a big risk in doing that because our thought was, we don't know if this is even going to go forward, but we wanted to get some of this work done so some of the base piping could be done. The water pipe would have to be laid up 18. But it's a drastically different discussion to run pipe through Whitman and Abington than it is through Quincy and Braintree. It just is. I mean, everything from police details and how many feet of pipe can you lay a day. So we're looking very strongly at the Aquaria route, as well as we have to study both. We're required to study both. But that's because part of it as it relates to Abington is Abington needs water. Is there an opportunity for that pipe that's coming up 18 to provide some water to Abington? Is there an opportunity in the MWRA scenario to provide water for the region, including Abington? So those are two things that you can see in our studies. We're funding with the SRA, with Weymouth, the studies and the filings for the MWRA. We're self-funding all of the Aquaria work. So just give you a sense of what we're working on. If you said, what keeps you up at night as to why this project may or may not go, it's that. I hate that map, but we'll do it. All right, sewer. Not going to spend a lot of time on sewer. Each community has some sewer challenges. Abington has a lot of flow, obviously, that goes to Brockton, but Rockland is significantly challenged in sewer. Weymouth not so much, because Weymouth is an MWRA community. So, but part of our state reports is we have to figure out the sewer issues. Still working on it on a regular basis. The next thing that we have to figure out, I'll go back because I jumped it, is transportation. This is sort of our yellow dot map. We're studying over 70 intersections. We've identified at least 30 of these 70 that either need new signals, reconstruction, signal timing improvements, or roadway widening. Because again, we're not looking at the base as you solve one intersection, okay, great, we can do something. No great surprise. Prior developer defaulted on all the permits. The permit for Route 18 to service the base allows for 500 vehicles a day. We have 2,200 people living there. Every permit's in default. Every permit wasn't finished. So we have a meeting actually coming up in early October with the state and MassDOT to talk about, we're presenting all the improvements that we have to make to all the various roadways, timing of those improvements so that we can move forward, assuming full build out of the base in all three communities. That's what we're focused on from a transportation standpoint. Water, sewer, transportation are three big infrastructure issues. Open space. Open space is a very big issue. We've actually been in front of, we had a lovely 3-hour site walk with your open space committee in the rain one Monday night a few weeks ago. It sort of cuts to the chase, a little bit about open space. Nearly 2/3 of the site will be either restricted or open space. The reason I mentioned the 900 acres of disturbance that happened when the base was built, we're going to end up protecting everything you see there in green. Almost the same 900 acres that are disturbed, 885 acres of the 1,400 acres of the base are going to end up being protected. 519 of those 885 acres are going to be restricted. What do I mean by that? Well, right now, there's a conservation management permit that covers this area. It's supposed to be a golf course. Today, that's what this is approved for, is a golf course in Abington and Rockland. We don't think that's the highest and best environmental use. We don't think that's the highest and best use for it, to put a privatized golf course there, but that's actually what the permit talks about. It also doesn't have, the restrictions sort of sit around here, and a few restrictions sit up there. Turtles do not stay in a straight line. They move around. There are areas where the state and where the turtles are, the restrictions don't match. So when we went to the state now, almost a year ago, and said, well, if we were willing to say, we'll restrict all of this area, down through Abington, primarily in Rockland, because where most of the habitat is, and up through here, for bird habitat, and for the turtles. And if we would restore the land, if you go out there now, I don't know if any of you have been out there, you look at the debris piles, 14 feet tall, all kinds of junk and debris that's in them, take those debris piles down, because that isn't good habitat. The areas that are out there now for bird habitat are much, much too small. Birds look for a minimum of 20 acres if they're going to land, and then they want 100 acres as primarily because predators, they're afraid of predators that sit in the debris piles. So we take the debris piles down, the ones, and they're in Abington now, right along through here, that's all debris. Take that down, restrict all of this land, agree to the open space all the way around to ring the base. That's what so it's really contiguous habitat, and that's what Natural Heritage likes, that's what the state likes, that's what they'd like to see. From that you can do public trails and other things and really kind of create and complete the trail network that was supposed to be there. What it does is for Abington is create this area. You may remember in 2017, zoned a bunch of that area for development, but here's the thing. L-Star defaulted, kind of ran out of town. They never finished the conservation management permit. Right now, the conservation management permit says even though Abington has zoned that, you can't develop it. We've got to change that. That's what we're working with Natural Heritage to do. Our trade with Natural Heritage is we're going to give you more land, we're going to restrict more of it, we're going to mow it, we're going to keep it up, we're going to create the open grassland, we're going to take the debris piles down. That's our commitment to them. In exchange, let's take out the golf course in Rockland and Abington and allow a little land for development. Otherwise, most of this land is really Weymouth developable.
So is National Heritage, are they supportive of the plan you have for the turtles?
They think we're actually protecting 63 acres more than they protect for the turtles. They like that a lot. What they're very concerned about, when you look at the plan, is they want the grassland. You know, there's a fellow who's going around sort of showing a picture of a meadow and saying, this is a meadow you got to protect. That meadow is actually over here in Rockland. And that's true, but it's only 19 acres. What they want us to do, take all the debris piles down, clear it all out, and create a real meadow of 103 acres. That's what we've committed we would do. They like that plan a lot. They like the idea that all of this land gets restricted, and it's all contiguous. If Chris, who's the environmental agent who works with Natural Heritage, would say, I like contiguous land, because then I know all of that is protected. The way it is now, parts of it are, but not all of it is. And it breaks itself up. And what we never understood, not to sort of get lost in open space, we're in front of the Finance Committee, is why they thought a golf course was environmentally sensitive. Because think about a golf course, that had in it a clubhouse, pathways, parking lots. I mean, not terrible, and privatized, and all mowed in a certain way, and kept great, but not a particularly great environmental piece if you're really trying to protect turtle habitat and bringing people, or bird habitat, bringing people through there. We never quite got that, but so what we're saying is we'll get rid of that and we'll actually make the plan work. So that's sort of what our goal is. So finally, we get to sort of a more of finance discussion. So let's talk a little. So we study water, we study sewer, we transportation, we look at open space, doing all that. Then you look, and we hired RKG. RKG is a nationally known company. They do a lot of work, mostly for Commonwealth of Massachusetts, state of New Hampshire, all over the country, primarily work for municipalities. We had something very unusual here that you don't normally have in a fiscal analysis. We had a really good example. Well, what could happen here? Well, wait a minute. We have 1,274 homes. Kind of would build in the right place. Yes, in Weymouth, not in Abington, and not in Rockland. But if you're going to project out, it's not projecting about, well, I got this raw piece of land in the middle of nowhere. What's that going to be? We actually got to look at what was the real world experience of Weymouth for police, fire, schools, what really happened out there. So we took a look at the base. We asked RKG, said, do us a study, independent study of what happens today. 1,274 homes, some commercial space, not highly rented out because of the way they built it. About 2,500 residents, 67 school-aged children. Sports complex, so get to the numbers, okay. Assessed value in Weymouth, $403 million. Gross taxes, $5.3 million. There are certain offsets. You got police, you got fire, you got school costs. They're $940,000 when we did the study. They have also some bond payments. They back some bonds and some other things that we've done. The net positive revenue, what I mean by that, on an annual basis, what do they get after they pay all their costs based on what's out there today? Over $3 million. And we went through this obviously with the treasurer, and we were able to verify all these numbers. So then we said to RKG, and I think you have a copy of the report, said, okay, go over to Abington. What's Abington's tax rate? How do they assess things? What are their costs? They do police, fire, superintendent, sort of where are they at? Now again, this isn't perfect science. I mean, you guys all know, but it's amazing to have, very rare, actually never had it before, where you have something kind of in the same place and say, okay, well, I've got that as my starting point. So we went and we said, okay, RKG, give us some analysis projecting out. And again, you have to figure full build, you use the current tax rate. I mean, those are the kinds of things that you look at. And so we took a look at that and we said, okay, Weymouth, and the other thing we did was a sensitivity analysis. We said, well, what if it's heavily commercial? We're commercial developers. We do residential, Pine Hills, we do a lot of other developments. Our Westwood project has residential in it. We're primarily commercial developers. We said, what if it's heavy commercial? Okay, what if it's heavy residential? What if it's 75-25 the other way? What would that look like from a tax standpoint? When we did the Weymouth numbers, we then did the Abington numbers, we did the Rockland numbers. When you look at Abington, what you see is that range of between 4 or 5, 4.2, $5.4 million. When you figure out what are the gross revenues based on the tax rate, build it all out, mostly residential, mostly commercial, what does that yield? And people look at that and say, well, how can you have residential being more advantageous than commercial? Because if I were here 10, 15 years ago, people would say, well, commercial's always better, you don't have any school kids. But it is a little different, and this is the hardest thing to explain, in that the type of housing that you build today, who lives in that housing, the number of children that we have in those housing units, the values of those housing. I mean, who would have ever guessed that over at the base, $1 million home, really, we should say, but that's, and townhomes selling $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, and the stacked flats, that it's just the value, and it's the type of community. We don't have as large families as we used to have. People look at it and say, well, they traditionally, 10, 15 years ago, you'd be talking, if you had a part residential project, 3, 4 bedroom home, single family colonial on 1 acre, and that's what you'd be building. That's not what's here, and that's not sort of what you would build in this area now. Now, flip side is commercial. As I said, we are commercial developers. One thing that we have promised the residents there is that we would build a town center. There is no place to go shopping. There is no place to get a cup of coffee, to drop off your dry cleaning. We're going to build a commercial center there. Now, it will take a while for that ever to make any money, in the sense of we'll have to build that space out and deliver that space to the users. But our sense is we want to build community. If you live there now, you'd say, there's no there, there's no place there. We feel we have to do that to kind of start to build that piece. We've talked to a lot of people who are interested in the commercial, because the 3 nodes that we've developed for commercial areas are the one down in Abington, the one over in Rockland near 228, and the top piece up in Weymouth. We've talked to a lot of commercial developers who are interested in, we do a lot of biomanufacturing, we do a lot of the work, but it's sort of the very basic thing that we have, one of the biggest challenges we have. When they talk about water and sewer, we don't have any. We're doing a project right now at the Manchester-Boston Airport up in Manchester, New Hampshire. We're working with one of the largest vaccine makers in the world. They did Moderna's vaccines, but they need to lift 1 million gallons a day in full build-out of water. I happen to be in Manchester. We have 2 million gallons worth of water, so we can do that. But that's one of the challenges that we have, and sort of why, when you talk about finance and what's going to happen, you've got to talk about the infrastructure, because the bottom line is, if we can't solve the infrastructure, we can't go forward with the project. That's our risk. We're going to, we have to go through local permits, state permits. If we ultimately can't solve that, we will not be able to build the project. I mean, that's because you don't have, there's not adequate water anywhere in any of the communities to do this project. A couple of notes that we put here on the fiscal, these are net dollars, obviously, after we've deducted police, fire, cost to go to the library, cost to someone to participate in an election, school costs. If it was mostly commercial, obviously a very, very limited school impacts. If it's mostly residential, I can tell you at the base, the experience has been 67 children for over 1,200 homes. Now that's more homes than obviously what we built in Abington, because in Abington, we have about developable 70, 80 acres, because we have a little bit more land than that, but you get streets and ways, and when you develop things, and wetland restrictions and buffer zones. It's not that big. It is the smallest piece. I mean, Rockland, quite honestly, kind of similar, maybe a few more acres, 450 up in Weymouth, so it is different. But don't take from that that it isn't very important to sort of what we're looking at. The other thing we're looking at with Abington is, can we be helpful with some of the MBTA requirements that are related off of the base, that, remember, you have to put the zoning in place. You don't have to build it, but you got to put the zoning in place. Our zoning would allow what they call the second tier. We don't have a lot of land in Abington that's within a half a mile. We have a lot of land in Abington that's outside the half a mile, which you can look at for second tier compliance. The small thing, but maybe not, that we're looking at, and our zoning would allow that, and that's something the planning board wanted to be very sure that our zoning allowed that to happen.
That's kind of in reference to the housing that's being required by the train station over Summer Street. is where they're,
Well,
off
that
of,
area.
off of something,
Yeah.
right, it has to be in that area.
But it doesn't
Within a
have
half
to be
mile.
there because this is next to a T station.
This is,
That
the
doesn't count?
Abington line is a half mile away from the train station, so
Oh,
it's
okay.
not, we don't get as much benefit from that.
We're second tier, we're not first tier. We only have a few acres in Abington
Oh.
that's within the half mile. We do have a lot of acres that are in the half mile to the mile radius, which you can do for second tier compliance. It helps some, and that's why I think the planning board wanted to be sure that, you know, helping some is better than not helping. So we feel very confident that, again, these are full build numbers. These aren't going to happen tomorrow. We have another year and a half worth of permitting. We'll probably start this project, there's no great surprise, over in Weymouth, because that's where the infrastructure and where it stopped. And then you start to bring that over. Makes a lot of sense for us to look at the commercial and residential opportunities that potentially are in Abington and Rockland, certainly because of the Parkway. And that's one of the things that we've been asked, and you should know, as a finance committee, people have said to us, well, why doesn't Weymouth take control of its piece, and Abington will take control of its piece, and Rockland will take control of its piece? A lot of issues associated with that. They're mostly financially related. You get a lot of private landowners who might not appreciate that. This base is controlled by the federal government. They may not appreciate that. They're owed a lot of money still. We've got them to agree to allow it to stay on the base to treat the contamination, but that's still an issue. There's, depending on the day, $50 to $60 million worth of bond debt is owed to the Commonwealth and others. That today sits with the SRA and sits with the future development of the base. That, from a purely objective standpoint, that's where that's got to stay. The communities don't, we were asked very pointedly by a Weymouth City Council, why don't we just take it all back? And it could be done potentially, but you also then have to accept the portion, your eligible portion of debt. I mean, that's sort of weird. The A&F, although lovely as they are, administration and finance, are probably just not going to say, sure, whatever happens, happens. So that's a little bit about fiscal. Almost done.
But John, you had mentioned earlier about a $60 million default.
Well, let's talk about that. Washington Capital, which is an agent for the Carpenters Union, loaned the prior developer $60 million. They never built anything, but they spent all the $60 million. I have some great stories about some of the things that they did with that $60 million, including a bar on the second level of Gillette Stadium, which I never quite, for $4 million, never quite figured that out, why a project in Weymouth, Abington, and Rockland had to have the second level bar at Gillette Stadium. But it came with a box, so I guess that would seem.
Is there any part of this $60 million default that is going to fall back on
No.
the three
It
communities?
falls back on us.
Okay.
No, that's our responsibility. The only community,
However, if this does not pass and you decide, I can't deal with this anymore and I walk away, is it still with you or is it then come back to us?
no, it would never come back to you, it would stay with the Carpenters Union.
Okay.
Stay with the Carpenters. But as you might imagine, then the Carpenters Union has to then decide what does it do, it's still owed $60 million, what does it do with the land? We think this is the best proposal to do a commercial residential development. There were, when we bid on this and got involved with the SRA, there were other people who bid on it also, but again, they were looking at it very much as the increment, fast in, fast out, which I don't think was in the best interest, certainly of the Carpenters Union or the base or any of the communities, because that's what that was going to be. The concern that you get then, and this sounds inappropriate, but yeah, been doing this a long time, noxious uses. People come in with things that nobody's going to want, but if you've got no other opportunity and you still owed $60 million, then you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And it's not a place, and the same thing I said over in Weymouth Council, the last place anybody wants to be, even if people don't support us and they want to try to support somebody else, okay, but the last thing you want is this land back or this land undeveloped. And the reason I wanted to speak to that for a minute, having 900 acres disturbed, heavily paved, without a master developer or anybody involved in this is a very dangerous thing. The amount of security issues of things that happen in Abington and Rockland and Weymouth are very problematic. People don't necessarily know about them. I never understood the Brazilian Kite Festival, which was one of the things that happened out there where people, hundreds of people show up. I do think it's an excuse to drink for the day. They fly some kites, no permits, no approvals, just sort of show up and do it. Lawnmower riding and racing, where they come in flatbeds and they unload lawnmower races and they race up and down the area. We've had movies of perhaps not the best type being filmed out in the back that we recently became aware of. We're providing more security to the SRA. I mean, it's not in our control, it's in the SRA control. But it's not good, and I think people who live there would say to you, what starts to break down? Curbing, their sewer, their sewer pump failed. We were able to get it, to give you an idea, they should be pumping 100,000 gallons a day. They were pumping 400,000 gallons a day in sewer. Sewer, a very valuable commodity in this region. We were able to actually do a taking. We assisted the SRA in taking all the L-Star land, not to get sort of involved in that, but L-Star, when we got involved, still owned most of the land in Abington and Rockland. They didn't foreclose on it. They never mortgaged on it. We actually worked with the SRA and helped them financially to be able to take it by eminent domain so we could get the land back. With that came all the streets and the water and sewer infrastructure, which was still owned by the prior developer. So we had to get that back. The same thing with the Coast Guard land. I don't know if you know the Coast Guard land. I'll just show it to you that's here. That went to public auction. It's a piece that, oh, went too far. Don't tell me my battery died. Paul, would you go back to that, if you wouldn't mind? The one that shows the land. Oh.
No, Craig's raising his hand.
Oh, Greg's asking a question.
Oh. Gone asleep. All right, we should wake it back up. But I'll give you an example. Coast Guard land is sort of up in the top right behind where the SRA is. 50 acres, 12 people bid on it. Some of the uses weren't great. We want to try to do a 40B, which isn't actually allowed in the legislation, but that type of development. We actually loaned the money to the SRA so the SRA could buy it. Because it was this piece up in here, yes, in Weymouth, not in Abington, but a very important piece as you come off of Shea Memorial Boulevard, where they used to have Coast Guard housing there. So we ended up loaning the money to the SRA so the SRA could buy it. For the very reason that keeping this base together in this Tiana area and developing that as a unit. I'll give you an example, and this is a finance-related issue. Every homeowners association, every piece of land and developed in every neighborhood has its own homeowners association. There's no master declaration. There's no way to treat all the roads the same way. There's no way to assess everybody equally for all of the improvements. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Everybody's got there's like 50 little fiefdoms running around in existing communities. And so what we've said, everything that you see there in Tiana is going to be one master declaration. From that will be all the roads. It'll all be controlled and properly assessed. The only way you know how to do it, the only way to do it, otherwise you have all of these folks with all different assessment opportunities, kind of a little bit of infighting going on. It's kind of a mess. And that sort of relates to the security issues I mentioned. You got to develop, there has to be someone developing the base. Curbing's breaking down, roadways are breaking down, sewer and water infrastructure breaking down. Because for 5 years, as good as the SRA is, and they are very good, and Roger and his group have done really very well by the community, all three communities, and keeping it together. But if there's no one there moving it forward, the bond for the parkway is in default. The state is accruing every day because the way that worked, it's an IQ bond. The revenues from the base is supposed to help pay the bond. Well, there haven't been any new revenues. Bond's accruing. Again, all of those things will eventually come to roost unless you go back into development on the space. I tried to explain to someone last night who's concerned about the stormwater. We have a whole stormwater plan, reduce the peak rate of flow. Stormwater out there is primarily controlled by two 48-inch pipes put in 1940. Two huge pipes. They're breaking down. Unless, sometimes you have to do something with land in order to fix the problem that exists. Because those pipes, if someone doesn't come out there and work on a master stormwater plan and figure that out, put in new detention basins, primarily in Weymouth, make all those flows work with new pipes, there's going to be problems out there. So those are the types of things that, when we look at it, that's why you really do want to see development out here, because it will actually not only bring revenues, bring fiscal opportunities, bring activity, all good things, but also take something that long-term, sitting there for another 5 years vacant, you just don't know what's going to happen. So that's really my presentation.
All right.
Happy to answer any questions.
I've got a couple of questions. My name's Chris Murphy. Oh, it's on there. The revenue that you quoted, that was annual revenue?
Yes, annual net
Okay.
revenue.
All right, it didn't say that. Second, the Twin Ponds Reservation that's next to this, that's not part
Thompson
of
Pond,
Hmm?
Thompson Pond.
But it's called Twin Ponds, there's a,
There's some off-site
Trail.
pieces,
yeah.
and I can tell you a little bit about that.
Well, it's just not part of
It's,
this.
it's not anything off the base,
All
no
right.
great surprise. L-Star, the prior owner, when they got in trouble, they did double and triple mortgages to people. And there are some entities that own pieces that they mortgage that were off-site, and some on-site, quite honestly,
But
small
how,
pieces.
how does this, will this affect it?
No,
No, okay.
will not, will not.
And the last question is, I think you said there are 1,294 units in Weymouth?
1,274 units today.
1,274. I know, I spent a lot of time there during the pandemic, walking around. How much of that is senior housing?
About 200
And-
units,
And I know that,
about 200 units,
200 units, okay. And that includes the...
varying weight.
Okay,
Yep,
All right.
and the rest of it is a combination of everything from single-family home, attached, detached, townhomes, condominiums, and apartments.
Is any of it affordable?
Affordability on this site, no 40Bs are allowed by legislation, but 10% of the site must be affordable, combination of what they call workforce housing and straight affordability. Right now, the base is about 12%. We will maintain, when we build, the 10%. We want us to maintain any residential in any of the communities at that 10% to keep everybody at the same level.
Greg, can you hear us? He had his
I
hand-
can.
Okay, you had your hand raised and we didn't notice because the screen's.
Yeah, no worries. I put it down because I'm assuming we're not at the point. The question I had was on the disparity when it comes to multifamily apartments, townhouses, condominiums, single-family homes. Is that going to stay the same? Are your plans to stay the same with that sort of ratio going forward, or a different ratio?
We, in all likelihood, will have more commercial than what is out there in Weymouth. The product, and this sounds, the type of housing that's there, the residence is there. We think that there will be a healthy mix. We're going to try to offer virtually all product types, all kinds of homes. So there will be some traditional multifamily, some that you have out there.
Sorry, I meant just, sorry, I should have been more clear, just in Abington.
Oh, just in Abington. And this is a hard answer for me. I can't tell you what we're going to do in Abington. I can tell you we can do residential and I can tell commercial. What exactly will be there, I don't know. Part of it will be market-driven. Some of the pieces that are closest to the T station, may have some residential housing. But that portion, the 3 areas that we've identified for really strong commercial opportunities are here, here, and here. So I can't tell you exactly what's going to be there. I think the type of housing will be very similar to what you probably saw at the base. As you get away from the center, as you get away from the parkway, no great surprise, housing becomes less dense, it becomes more opportunity for single. We don't think there's a lot of single-family opportunity here. That's just something that's not going to be our focus. I'll be surprised if you see more than a total, all over the base, a couple hundred single-family homes. That would be a lot. That would be a lot. We don't really see that and also we don't see the demand for that. This is sort of what the market is telling us.
Anything else?
So basically, you're saying on the Abington side, there's only really ability for commercial, whatever.
No, that's not true. There is ability for residential too. We have identified it as a very logical commercial site. The exact type of housing, I can't tell you because I think again, you get away from the center and if you can see it on the screen now, we anticipate there'll be the less dense housing as you get away, but we also know that there is some land that does cross, right here that is in the half-mile radius. Might there be an opportunity for a multifamily building there? Sure. Probably not consistent if we decide to do a commercial piece there. Probably wouldn't want to do that. But the zoning would allow that because that's part of the quadrant for the MBTA compliance. So, we think there will be, and that's why we tried to put in the fiscal study, heavy residential, heavy commercial, how does it look? Don't know exactly yet. And again, we'll probably start right up in this region. No great surprise, it's sort of where most of your infrastructure is, and we'll start up probably around here, then move here, which may include some of Abington.
Anything else, Greg?
Not for this particular topic, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to orientate myself a
Sure.
little bit better, that where the Weymouth Abington line is,
Yep.
where the, that top yellow portion, what's on the other side of, what does that come out to?
That line right there is the Weymouth Abington
No,
line?
no,
No? Okay,
down further over, down,
down,
where it says Weymouth Abington line,
right there.
right there.
Okay.
What is there? Not, that's not the base, what's on the other side of that? Do you know what I mean?
There's a piece of what they call the Thompson Pond area that's over there. In Abington, you have some industrial pieces there.
Okay.
There's a railroad crossing.
So the mustard
That's it.
field, the mustard field?
Adams.
No.
Yeah, it's more Adams Street, Coal Tar, right?
Yeah.
The cement plant too, Barbara.
The cement plants, yeah,
Yeah.
over there, that's right.
Yeah, the cement plant's right on the line,
Right.
on the
Okay,
Abington line.
so this is like along the back of it, runs kind of parallel down 58.
Yep.
Mhm. Mostly sort of industrial and different uses that are right along the edge there. There's one railroad crossing that's sort of down there that takes you through the woods a little bit. That's the only railroad crossing that's there.
And so what would the impact be to like the homes that are in the neighborhood that would abut this?
One of the reasons we did a perimeter buffer and realize, our roadway network is going to take people probably up and out Parkway, Trotter, and Shea. We're not proposing that we're going to put an access road that's going to be directly into Abington. So I think from those folks, it's going to be very limited impact.
But I'm even
So-
thinking like view, if it ends up being more commercial and it's a larger building, and what's that going to be like for the residents?
I have to tell you what, this is not a great plan, but give you a sense, this is 1,400 acres. Green space is hundreds and hundreds of acres and setback.
Okay.
When
So
you-
it's not something that
It's
they're-
really
right.
not, here was our thinking. Create the base is a place, it's created by legislation, has its own sort of set of controls and approvals. Wrap the base in sort of a green buffer zone and restrictions. So that from a pure resident standpoint, the base sort of stays as its own unique development, not add, one of the, and we talked about the selectmen, some of the folks who quite honestly don't want development on the base have said, oh, you're gonna run a street right up through the Turtles from Spruce Street and right up through the middle, and that's what you're gonna do. Putting aside the fact that the state would never allow us to do it, and it's restricted, and you can't do it, and it's a recorded title restriction, put that aside. That's not what we're going for. We're trying to go for a place that has a lot of green around it, has a lot of walking trails. As you go out there today, if you spend some time out there, people walk everywhere. We actually, one of the first times we were out there, Ricardo Dumont tells this story much better than I do, people walking along the runway. And he's looking at design things, and he said, well, you're not taking away the runway, are you? Because I like to walk my dog with the runway, and that's what we do. We may take away the runway in the purest sense, but the idea of connectivity, the runways to greenways, it always is difficult to sort of show the green little piece that's down all through here is over 600 acres. And it's really significant. And the piece that's over in Abington, to give you a sense, Abington total piece is about 179 acres. 80 acres of it is all green. So it's not an insignificant piece.
Thank you.
So a couple of questions. One, you mentioned no intent to put an outlet or access road into the Abington piece. Would one of the things we've talked with previous developers about is if there would be some sort of access for public safety vehicles.
Yeah, and we've obviously talked to the fire chief and the like, and we've done some time studies to show what would it mean from the fire station if you came up to Trotter? What would it mean if you came to Spruce and came through the gate at Union Street and came around? We're going to probably end up recommending, and again, but I never tell a fire chief what they should do, is that when you look at the time studies, path of travel, ease of travel, that's better than trying to create at the one crossing that's there. If you know that area at all, it's not flat, it's got wetlands, it's not
Railroad
smooth.
tracks.
It's really difficult to make that connection. We're not gonna recommend that. Do you really want to take a $350,000 fire truck and put a fire truck through there? We'd say no. And when you look at the time trials, and we had actually our site civil engineer do those time trials, I think the chiefs are all gonna conclude, including in Rockland, better to use the roadway network that's there and then to construct than to try to create something that may look shorter, but is got other issues associated.
Next question, first of all, grew up on the North Shore, very familiar with the Liberty Tree Mall, spent
good.
a large portion of my childhood inside of it. Work near University Station now, absolutely fantastic project.
Thank you.
There.
Paul should say thank you too. He's a project manager on that.
Yep, great job. I assume when you went into there, you went in with an idea in mind, knowing you've said many times, don't have a crystal ball, you don't know how it's going to go. You've talked a little bit about the yellow area kind of between the two browns, like being the likely start, but what kind of a plan is your starting point, and sort of what are you looking at timetables?
Sure. We think through our state approvals, understanding water and sewer, we'll have all of next year. We'll do that. So then we sit into 25. We won't have, whether it's Aquaria or the MWRA, water there, because 2 years to permit, 2 years to run a pipe, minimum. Weymouth does have water and has some ability, and has traditionally had a contract for this site to supply some additional water. It's one of the reasons we'd start in Weymouth, because there's water there. Because we actually have to think about, we don't want to wait and say, okay, we have our permits in 2025, we'll wait till 2030, and then we'll start. We don't want to do that. Communities don't want us to do that. You want us to start to take over and create a place. There are some water availabilities in Weymouth. We would start there. If you start there, you start thinking probably initially, sort of twofold. You'd start thinking about residential, sort of tacked on. You'd probably start to think about, if one of our first thing was to take the hangar area and create this area, start to develop in here, you probably look, your first project in Weymouth might be more a multi, might be a stacked flat condominium like we did in Westwood next to the train station. That's the condominium project. Those are the types of things we'd sort of start first with, is our sense. We said we would build the town center. The town center is probably going to go in this area right off the Parkway. That's also probably one of the first things we'd do. Not huge, about 80 to 100,000 square feet, but the idea to start to create plates. We've thought about the hangar and could that be an attribute as to how you might think about that, to do farmers market, that type of thing. I think it's all going to be here. Partly it's going to be driven by there just won't be any water or sewer in the other community. I mean, we can say we'd like it to be different than that, but it's not.
Yeah.
So Weymouth has some water. Our goal is to be able to structure this so that we're building, we're moving forward, things are starting to open, permanent solution is under construction, we know when it's going to come on timeline, we're going to try to match that up. It's a little bit of a chess move to not go too far, because the last thing you want to do is, oops, we don't have enough water to continue to open that building.
Yep.
Same token, we don't want to just wait and see what's going to happen. So that's why it's probably going to be there, it's probably going to be in that area, it will be in Weymouth. I'm going to guess it will be, like, the townhomes, which are, if you know the base at all, have done very, very well. And, that would be a product that we would think, would make a lot of sense to sort of continue that. That's what our thinking is. Now, that all said, Paul and I were there last week with a very large national commercial developer who does more industrial and would like to look at a couple of the areas to do biopharma. The problem with that is it does also, some of them need water. So there's a lot of interest in that, because whenever you have this amount of space. But again, we have to be very careful. You have an existing residential community. We think some residential makes sense here. How do you put the two together? I mean, that's something that, And one thing, and I didn't talk about the zoning, but I think it's very important, just like you create a master declaration about how everything gets paid for and done, we changed the zoning in this way. Two kind of important things you should know. If we're going to self-develop with Brookfield a lot of the base, we're not going to self-develop all of it. I mean, there are people who are interested and would like to develop there. But when they come with a proposal, they have to come to us. We have to review it. We have to review it against the water, sewer, transportation, fiscal impacts. That's all what's in the zoning. We have to review to be sure this is fiscally positive for the community that we're going to put it in. You evaluate all that. The design is good, kind of fits in what we see. If you've ever looked at what our projects are, we have a certain eye and a certain way we want it to look. We have to give a certificate for them to be able to even make an application to Roger's board to be able to seek approvals. Then when they, by the way, we have to do the same thing. Then they have to file your traffic reports, your wetlands reports, all those other things which will get peer reviewed, goes through a whole approval process. And the findings that have to be made are that all the things that we've said about transportation, water, and sewer, that whatever your project is has to fit into those findings and impacts. If you exceed any of those impacts, you can't go forward. So we've tried to create a process that puts controls, because we want to control, obviously, everything that happens there, which doesn't exist there today, but also give the SRA a measuring stick to say, well, if this doesn't meet what they said the impacts are going to be or in any way exceeds it, we don't even have to take it in. That's how we set up the zoning. Very, very different than what has been there, which has sort of been, oh, you know, good project, make a filing. There's nobody reviewing the design or how it fits in. So long-winded answer to that.
Good answer, though. And then the other question that I had was, if you can go back to slide 7 and compared to this slide, I wanted to look at the zoning on slide 7.
Okay. This one. Well, you may have to do it. There you go. That one, yeah.
So obviously on the proposed zoning map, a lot of what will be protected or kept as open space is still listed in the zoning. I'm assuming that's to give you the ability to kind of draw the border as you see it as you're going along.
Exactly right, but let me explain that because it's a very critical point.
Yeah.
Abington, yeah, we put a buffer around it. There's about 100 acres left that's here. We zone it as the mixed-use development district. But zoning is one thing. That's all it is one thing. It's one layer. It's like, well, yes, you can have 100 acres, but if it's all wet, you can't build on it.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, virtually 100% technically of the Abington land is covered by a title restriction with a conservation management plan with natural heritage, or a golf course, and that's all that can be built there. When we go back, we're going to, and we showed you in that plan that was just up, we're going to say, you know, well, Abington in 2017 rezoned this and created this as for opportunity. We would like to be able to develop on this land. But L-Star, the former owner, never finished. We got to go back and negotiate with them. Now, exactly where that line is going to end up, I don't know. Because we're going to say, well, we think it ought to be here before you get to the wetland tacking area. It ought to be right there. But they may say, well, no, come down a little bit more and protect more land over here. I don't know that. I won't know that till we're all through the state approval process. As much fun as it is to go through a 2/3 town meeting vote, I do not want to do it again if we get voted. So yes, I don't know, but all that does is create zoning. We're taking a risk, and the risk is we may go to the state and they say, you know, we like the line right there and golf courses are good. And we may not get approved. We may be, all of the Abington land and most of the Rockland land may be undeveloped. But that's the risk that we take, that we go through, do all the planning, do the zoning, go through all the local approvals. But MIPA, the state, wants to know that the local folks support what you're trying to do and the uses that you want to do it at. Because and you folks who focus on finance issues will certainly appreciate this. One of the biggest challenges we have is credibility. Nobody believes this space is going to happen. Now, we think we're pretty good at it. We've done it. We've been pretty successful at it, but nobody thinks it's going to happen. And as us in Brookfield as sponsors, people will say, okay, probably got a shot, but nobody believes it. The development community in New England is very small. 6 or 7 major developers were one of them in New England. That's it. And everybody looked at this. And the fellow who worked on this base in the early 2000s called me up and he said, John, I thought you were pretty smart. I don't think you're so smart. I said, David, I don't appreciate that. He's a very nice fellow. It is a real challenge to sort of figure out how we can go forward in the risk profile that we have. And we talked to the Open Space Committee about this. You have to understand, we're going into this knowing that as it relates to Abington and Butcher Rockland, we may not be able to develop. We think when we say to the state, and by the way, we've met with them several times. They've been out on sidewalks. They do like our plan. But we have to go and they have to make a decision to change the regulatory framework so we can develop. And that's the risk that we take. When people say, well, that means you can put anything you want in all of Abington or all of Rockland or all of Weymouth, that's just not true. People have said it. And what they realize is if you want to close your eyes and pretend that a title restriction with the state, just like if it was a wetland or something else that says you can't do that, doesn't exist, okay, that's right. Zoning is just a piece. But we have to show to the development community, which is one of the reasons if the community should not vote for it, then the development community is going to say, well, see, I told you that isn't going to work. And that is, it's just reality because people, it's not a question of people don't want to see this happen. And certainly the development community want to see it developed and think that being 14 miles out of Boston is a really good idea and close to 18 and got a T station. Everybody thinks that's great, but it's failed so many times that nobody believes it can happen. And maybe we are kind of crazy to try it, but this is kind of what we do. And we think that we've worked with the state a long time. We get a lot of trust and credibility there, both in the transportation and the natural heritage world, that we can convince them that this can work. But this is the first step, and everybody's got to support it. The way the legislation works, if one of the 3 communities votes it down, we're kind of in limbo. Because it says the zoning has to be approved by all 3 communities and all has to be consistent. That's a huge, I mean, that alone should have scared us off and said, don't do this. Because, to get 2/3 plus 1 of everybody in a room to agree this is a good idea and do it in multiple communities, all for the same piece of paper, but that's what you have to do.
Can I follow up on that about the failure? And this question goes to our SRA representative from Abington, Roger Woods. And we've failed 4 times in the past 27 years. So why should we believe this time is it, and that we're going to see net fiscal benefits will be realized by the town of Abington?
Good question. Roger Woods, I'm the SRA rep from Abington. I was on the Board of Selectmen in '98, I think, when this started, and they wanted to build a mall here. So thank God they didn't build a mall. Let's be honest, the malls are shutting down everywhere. I think the key, and I'll be brief because, trust me, you don't want to hear me, you want to hear Mr. Tuig. The first thing is, this is a failed project. Just think of a building, or you hear a business going bankrupt. They're not going in saying, okay, we can go in right now and talk to Weymouth and we can stop building over there. They're looking at the entire project, which anybody else wouldn't do. That's what impressed everybody with New England Development in Brookfield. They were heavily vetted more than any other developer that's come to the base, first of all. They have experience with distressed situations like this. This is a bankrupt site. There's no other way to say it. For the poor people that live there, they're in the middle of a desolate area. If you've gone over there, a lot of us probably have. The Abington end, the Rockland end, is where they dumped everything from what they built in Weymouth. That has to be taken care of. Not even talking about New England Development. We have issues there. We just boarded up the towers because things were going on over there. And there's 2 towers on the Abington land, by the way. One of them had been there for years. The second one got built, I think, 2 years before the base closed. The base was announced closing, and they still built the tower because it was funded. It's crazy. These guys have experience with the state. They have experience with the government. I'm into this only for a year. Kevin Donovan was our representative before. If you looked at the map that showed the different ownerships, this was just, there were multiple owners from being the government to the Coast Guard to other companies to Elstar who went bankrupt and fraudulently took all that money. These guys stood up, not having a permit to do anything, and put not only time, but a lot of money into working with the SRA to get the ownership straightened out. That was the first thing. So any other developer would have went in and said, oh, we can buy the piece Barbara owns and we'll go build a 50-unit apartment, and they'd walk away. These guys have said up front, we're not doing anything till we solve all of the problems for the whole base. That's the first thing I think we should all, thank them for. I'm speaking for us, for Abington, I'm our only rep. Weymouth, Rockland, and Abington, we have a great SRA board. We work together well. Everybody's on the same page, which doesn't happen all the time. You know how it is with Rockland. We grew up fighting them all the time. But these are the right guys for the job. They're trying to solve all of the problems of the base, from transportation, water, sewer. They're being respectful of the Spruce Street people, because there's rumors about putting a road through there. They're putting a buffer around it, From the SRA's point, we're completely comfortable with them. And the big thing is, they have the money to do it. This isn't a fly-by-night outfit. They've been, I think, 40 years or so. They have a track record. Plus, they're from here. They did Westwood Station, which I go a lot on the train in New York. It's beautiful out there, the Pine Hills. Mr. Green's here. These are the same guys we've been dealing with from the beginning. We can pick up the phone if we have a question. If Barbara called me with a question, I can call them and they answer the phone. I don't send an email and hear a week later. So I think that means a lot. They're not just doing it to get in. They're not going to make $1 for a long time over there. That's another thing I think we need to realize. This is from Abington. We have the chance to develop the last 70 acres in town road. There's no other piece in Abington that's that big, 70 to 80 acres of buildable land. This is a long-term revenue stream for the town. Some people don't like development, some people do. I've been in the real estate business for 38 years in Abington. These guys are the real deal, and they're not just putting in the time in, they're putting the money in. But the thing we have to realize is, we finally have someone that's looking at it as a whole. They're not just looking at building on this lot and that lot. They're looking to develop it over a 10 or 15-year period. Any impact is going to be gradual, and I think it's going to be positive impact, because there's going to be a huge net to the town. So I hope you look favorably on it, but we're very comfortable with the developer that we've picked and look forward to working with them. And it's been great to work with them so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a couple of follow-up questions for John.
John, good, please.
So just in your financial impact report, it says that it's static. So we see a number of 4.2, $5.4 million. Realistically, when could the town realize that?
It is a full build-out number.
Right.
Our sense is, I showed you where we would start. And it's in Weymouth, because that's where the water is. I'll tell you, if we were able to get a query of water, soon, that is the quickest path, actually, for water for this region, because you're running one pipe up Route 18. It doesn't have a lot of the MWRA and related issues. Nothing wrong with the MWRA solution. It's great water and can really work. But you're not going to see, we're all at 24, permits in 25, hopefully. Starting in Weymouth, I think you're probably close to 2030, depending on the water solution, before you would see something that has got the water and sewer capabilities to be constructed here in Abington. That's sort of my sense. Not great, but probably pretty realistic, given what it means to bring the utilities here. And that's the biggest challenge that we have.
So you're giving us the reality of when we possibly could realize this. What's the reality, unvarnished, if Abington doesn't pass this on you and on this project? Because everything you've laid out makes sense, and I appreciate Roger's comments there too, and the confidence that he has in New England Development Brookfield. But if we don't, because I know this question was asked at the selectmen's meeting, but it's like, I feel like you're holding back, like, what is the reality to the town? It's like, because we're looking, I mean, we've got $60 million in bonds sitting out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've got the federal government, we've got the Navy, we've got the state involved in this. What's the reality of it?
Well, why are you holding back, and why do you have that sense? You always have to be careful, and Steve Karp told me this when I was a very young lawyer. You're going into someone's community, and you're asking to be allowed in because they're sort of kings and queens of the castle, and you're asking to be allowed in, so always be very respectful and acknowledge that. The reality is if this isn't approved in the communities, then the zoning doesn't work. We can't comply with the legislation. We can't build out the project. We're kind of put in limbo because the legislation will be uncomplied with. We probably won't file the state permits. We probably, in all likelihood, will close up and we won't go forward. We do really think this has to be the whole base because that's how it works. To have development in any one of the communities because of what it costs to run the permanent water infrastructure. You have to be able to do enough development to pay for all that. You never say never, but our sense is, and I meant what I said before because it sends a message. And the message is to the state, who's owed money and has defaulted bonds, and others who said, well, the communities don't support this. Sends a message to MIPA, who has to approve it, sends a message to Natural Heritage, sends a message to the development community. And quite honestly, and this sounds less than humble, my mother always said, don't sound that way, but we're really good at this. And there are a lot of people who are in the real estate business who would say to you, if New England Development can't do this in Massachusetts, in its hometown, I don't know who else, there isn't anybody else going to say, well, but we can do it. Because it is a small community who do this kind of work and do large-scale projects successfully for a long time. And that's the group that you need. If we can't do it, I don't think there are other people going to say, well, I've got a better relationship or I can do more. They don't exist. We have one of the largest financial partners in the world. We're not small in ourselves. We're a 600-employee organization, run multiple sites. A lot of development. We're financially very strong. If we can't do it and the communities won't support it, I think the message would just be too dire to all of the stakeholders who would say, hey, you guys couldn't do it either, so it's going to fail a fifth time. Now, when it fails, and this is the part because it sounds threatening that you don't want to talk about, people are going to say, well, wait a minute, the SRA doesn't have a master developer. It's owed debt that's in default. You have Washington Capital that lent $60 million in default and pay. They're going to people saying, what can we do to get that money back and to make those things right? And I don't know what happens after that. I don't think any of it is good.
Right.
Because A&F, as lovely as they are, Administration and Finance is going to say, we did an IQ bond here. It's $6.5 million in default as it sits right now because they're supposed to get paid back on an annual basis by revenues, many revenues. So they're in default. They're going to come a-calling and to say, how are we going to get, SRA is not going to be able to pay them. SRA is an organization that's a pass-through organization and a permitting and development. That's what they do, but they don't independently have funds. If you don't have a master developer, then it's going to fall on the land. And A&F, been working with A&F a long time, I think they're going to say, well, we have 3 communities, we built a parkway through there, we've developed it, this space was designed for economic development has failed, who's paying us our money? I bet they're going to turn to the 3 communities which benefit from the base and get tax revenues and say, okay, we're going to allocate X number of dollars and we want to get paid. Now, I don't know that, and that sounds bad and threatening and inappropriate, and that's what you don't want to do if you're trying to say, would you please support what we're trying to do? I do think it's reality. I think that's what happens because I don't think you're going to see other developers step in.
So would you say prior to you coming in, there really wasn't a plan? It was patchwork. It
Well-
wasn't comprehensive as what you're proposing now?
There's certainly, there was a plan and a model and all kinds of things that L-Star did. It wasn't a realistic plan.
Okay.
You couldn't actually financially do it. No one is going to occupy a 20-story office building
Right.
in Abington. Said with great respect, but we struggle hard. The office market in Massachusetts is primarily outside of 128, leave Boston for a minute, but primarily is up in Waltham and in that region. It has moved down to Newton, if you think about what TripAdvisor is in that area on 128. It's now migrated down to Westwood, and we built the Citizens Building, we built Brigham and Women's. We just closed last month, on the new Dana-Farber Brain Cancer Center. That sort of moved. That's about as far south as it really has come. And so you don't really have that market that has come down here yet. What you do have is you have a housing market, you have that. You have some retail markets, even though retail is challenged, but you have some retail markets, and especially grocery based, okay, that's there. You have some manufacturing and support, you have some of that. Those are the things that are real. The mini Fenway Parks and the 20-story buildings, those aren't real. That plan that they did, well, I'll give you another example, Westwood. When we took over Westwood, here was the plan for Westwood. We're gonna build 6 million square feet of Westwood. They're gonna stack a Wegmans on top of a Target. They're gonna build 10,000 structured parking spaces. That's what the development's gonna be. It's the silliest thing I ever saw. Each one of those parking spaces cost today, probably was less than, almost $50,000 a space. They got all structured parking. It was a silly plan. The developer, when they would be asked for additional support or need more money, they would just add in another 100,000 square feet of space and say, well, we're going to build it, and then we'll get the money from that, we'll do that. This was a little bit like that. They said, well, we'll just make it bigger, and then we'll say there's, but no one was running a financial model. Is there any demand for any of that? And the answer was no. And that's not the way we look at it. So I don't see someone else coming in and saying, oh, there's demand for that. Was there ever a real plan? No, not a financially feasible plan. Just like there wasn't when we came into Westwood. Westwood is a very successful project of slightly less than 2 million square feet that has medical uses, hotel uses, specialty office, retail, grocery, and housing. That all works today. A little less than 2 million square feet. Now, this project is much larger because we have much more land, but that type of microcosm will work because of how people live today, how they want to have centered uses, combined uses. I mean, when I was growing up and you had the malls, you go to the mall and you hang out there for 4 or 5 hours. And you had the big stores would run all the advertising and they'd run all the sales, and that's why you made all the money in the small stores and the food courts, and that's all worked. But that's all gone. The reason we redid Cambridge side, people live there, people work there, people work out there, public transportation in the Leechmere Station, there's retail opportunities, there's food, and there's entertainment. You got to put that all together, because if you don't do that, it's not going to work today, because it's not how people are not going to spend 4 or 5 hours on one experience. You want to do multiple things all at the same time, because guess what? Everybody's busy, got other things to do, I got to pick up my kids, I got a game over here, I got to do this stuff. That's just the reality. That plan didn't reflect how we live and what people did. So long-winded way, it wasn't a real plan. Didn't make any financial sense, just like when we inherited the Westwood plan. Didn't make any financial sense, couldn't afford to build it. There wasn't demand for 5 million square feet of retail space at that. There was demand for about 1 million square feet of retail space. Well, that existed, but not 5 million.
Can you, I have a last question, as far as, we've been at this for a long time, base closed 97, 98, and there was about 100. How does South Weymouth Naval Air Station and that property shape up against the other 99 across the country? Because it feels, it's hard to believe that these other communities have gone through this and where they're still twiddling their thumbs saying, geez, well, we got some homes, but we still don't really have a plan. Where does this stand in relation to other bases that closed? Do you have?
Yeah, I can give you, some of my stuff is anecdotal, but I'll tell you, when we've looked at other bases, and Brookfield's done other bases, and so I've done that. From a contamination standpoint, this base is actually pretty good. It's not heavily, there are some contaminations, but it's not heavily contaminated. Some of the bases have very significant issues. This doesn't have it. So from that environmental standpoint, it's good. Proximity to major metro areas, proximity to Boston, pretty good. You have public transportation, needs to be expanded, but you have public transportation. 14 miles in. Now, it's not a pretty 14 miles, those of us who drive every day, but from the South Shore. It is, but it's not huge distances, and you can do it by public transportation, and it sort of works. So that's good. What it doesn't have, a lot of the bases had lots of infrastructure, not just roadways and things, but heavy electric, heavy water, heavy sewer. This base doesn't have any of that. And that's our region doesn't have any of that. So when you sort of rank it and say environmental contamination, pretty good. Proximity to major metro areas, pretty good. Workforce, pretty good. Pricing that can support a lot of the costs of the infrastructure, pretty good. Availability of infrastructure, primarily for commercial or retail or housing developments, pretty low, not good. That's a little unusual because a lot of these bases, there's one we were looking at, an Army base out in Indiana, which we have some involvement in. And they made, it was a base, Army base, but had a huge munitions facility associated with it. And they have power and water and sewer and capabilities that are just enormous. So when you think about, and by the way, their plan is to build 18 million square feet of space, and they're putting data centers out there, and that's not why we're involved with it. That has all the infrastructure you'd ever want, and all the roadway network. Now, it's in the middle of Indiana. If you want to go to Indiana, nothing wrong with Indiana. But that's a comparison of a real sort of another base, munitions, contamination, because of how they dealt with things, but really good infrastructure. I don't know if that, but that's sort of.
Right, but I guess that is, have they done anything?
Oh, yeah, sure. Their bases,
Because I don't feel like I take the commuter rail and go by, it's like, they built some housing there, it's like, okay. But there was supposed to be this master plan and all this other stuff, whether you want a golf course or movie theater, but nothing's happened.
Yeah.
And it's like in comparison to the other 99 bases that closed, it's like, oh, where do we stand?
I'll say, and it's what I said in the beginning, it's one of the reasons why it has always failed. Everybody always looked at it, I get a little something on my infrastructure, I build a little something until the string runs out and I can't get the next thing.
Right.
If you don't solve the big picture, which is the infrastructure that you need to build out the base, you're always going to be chasing yourself, trying to find that next piece of infrastructure so I can build something. And when the string ran out on the last, well, they never actually pulled the string, but, it wasn't there, and they didn't use the money to figure out how to get the infrastructure so they could actually build. If you don't, it's like building a house, you don't build the foundation that's going to give you the utilities so you can go vertical. It's no different. This isn't rocket science. This is kind of basically how you have to look at it. No one has ever spent the money and the time to figure out the significant problems. The significant problems are there's no infrastructure to support any vertical construction. That's what we're trying to do. That will allow the base to go forward. My explanation and discussion about why a lot of these bases had a leg up on this one, the infrastructure was in place, the availability and the capacity was there, so you could think about the vertical development. We can't even get there yet.
And speaking of capacity, do you have bonding capacity to deal with this? You talk about an $80 million pipe to get water.
Yeah.
Is the bonding capacity there?
Well, and no great surprise, but part of it in working as the SRA as a co-applicant with Weymouth is also some support from the state, because the state wants to bring water to this region that doesn't exist. And I can't speak for the state, but we do expect that there's going to be some support there. As we look at it, there will be probably a bit of we helped get some funding for some MassWorks grant for looking at some of the intersections. Even though we don't have any permits to go forward, but we did that last year, Hingham Street in that area, working on that to get some MassWorks, get some design to sort of kick off some of the transportation improvements, and that was money from the state. We do expect there'll be some. Some of it will be monies we're just going to have to fund. Exactly where that financial cocktail will come out depends on what the final project is. If it's water that's going to service the region, we'll participate. Probably won't have the lion's share of it. If it's water that ends up, if it's Aquaria, for example, that's going to sort of fund and provide water to an Abington and Rockland and the base, that's certainly going to fall really to us to take care of.
Okay, but does the SRA have bonding capacity beyond the $60 million that they've already?
You know, that's interesting. When the legislation got changed in 2014, a lot of that bonding was sort of related to the communities as opposed to the SRA individually. There are opportunities, for example, to consider a DIF district, you know, which is the Development Infrastructure Financing. There are opportunities to consider iCubed. We've used iCubed a lot. We did a project in Chestnut Hill, if you know the Chestnut Hill Square Mall, which has a Wegmans and has Beth Israel's headquarters there, and we did that project. We had to widen Route 9, rebuild Hammond Pond Parkway, move all the telephone poles. We had about $40 million worth of infrastructure that we did for the roadway. We did that through iCubed. We actually fronted the money, did all the work, and then did that through iCubed. iCubed is, for those who don't know, a project that the state provides dollars if you can prove that you're going to create jobs and sales tax revenues that don't currently exist that would pay those bonds off. We did that about 10 years ago. Our bonds have a surplus to them. We've actually showed that we've created more revenues than the amount of the bonds. And effectively, the Parkway is a form of an iCubed bond. So we think iCubed is available. We think MassWorks grants are available. We think outright funding from the state is available. But a lot of it is also, as we have in all of our projects, developers have to fund the difference. You know, so that's, I mean, part of, we've done it a lot. University Station, we had to do both ends of the intersections. We had to rebuild University Avenue. You know, that project had about $35 million worth of infrastructure that primarily we ended up funding. That's sort of the nature of what this work is.
Anything else? Greg, anything from you on Zoom? Any final question? If he's still there. Well, John, thank you so much, and your team, thank you for coming tonight. I know me personally, seeing this presentation, I now understand the motivation behind the articles a lot better than I did, and also the potential financial impact of this project is much more clear to me, and I'm sure to the committee as well. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Scott, do you want to come up and join us up here? Yeah, you do. Can we take a 5-minute break? Can we do that without like
Yes, we
adjourning?
can.
Oh, okay. Please. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. Come back here at 8:45. All right, and we are back from our break. So we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is discussion and voting on our recommendations for each of the warrant articles for the special town meeting coming up October 14th. And so since we have it displayed here for everyone who's watching, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the article title,
Not the whole article.
not the entire paragraph for each. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
those who are interested can read it themselves online. And then we are going to group together Article 2, 3, and 4 to make that easy. So we'll do first. So Article 1, establish and fund new opioid settlement stabilization fund.
Motion to recommend approval of Article 1.
Second.
So the motion is to recommend approval for Article 1. It's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes. All right. We are going to group together Article.
Sorry, real quick.
Sure.
I know that Kelly goes back and watches the video and is taking the notes, but do we have somebody, we should probably at least have somebody recording the vote totals.
I'm recording the vote.
Yeah, we have no.
Excellent.
Yeah, Andrew's out. Yeah, he knew.
Yeah.
He knew he was going to have
It's
to
not,
work.
it's not Andrew anymore.
No, it's my turn.
Oh, that's right.
I'm recording the vote.
That's right.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yep.
Um,
Much
The
appreciated,
newest,
Sarah,
the
thank you.
newest flood, right? That's how that works. All right, so Article 2, 3, and 4, I'll read the titles. Amendment to zoning bylaw, which is Article 2. Article 3, approval of South Weymouth Naval Air Station zoning district map. And then Article 4, amendment to zoning bylaw.
Make a motion to recommend approval of Articles 2, 3, and 4.
Second.
The motion is to recommend approval for Articles 2, 3, and 4. It's been seconded. Is there any discussion?
So the question I have and why I hesitated even on what my motion was going to be is, do we as a board want to recommend approval, or do we want to defer to the zoning board? There are at least potential financial implications with these, as we just discussed for an hour and 45 minutes. So I think we can certainly make a recommendation on them, but I did want to get everybody's
I think it's important that we do make a
feeling.
recommendation.
Yeah,
One way or the other.
I agree. I agree.
So,
Yeah.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And last but not least, Article 5, funding of fire station and DPW building project.
let someone else make the motion on this one.
I'll make the motion to approve Article 5.
Is there a second? Anybody?
I'll second for discussion purposes.
So the motion is approval of Article 5, funding of fire station and DPW building project. It's been seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yes.
I'm sure there is.
There's definitely discussion on this
Yeah.
one.
Who'd like to go first?
So,
Greg has his hand raised, by the way.
Should we start with
I-
Zach? Or
Yeah,
do you want time or are you good?
nope.
Sorry, I disrupted.
Greg's got his hand up.
I really, really want to see this project go forward. After our last meeting, though, I read a statement from the chairman of the building committee for that fire station DPW. And I'm concerned that it doesn't seem like it's a joint venture. It doesn't seem like, I don't get the sense that it seems like it appears from that statement that there's a lot of division, and that makes me concerned that the DPW, and we haven't talked with John. We have talked pretty extensively with the fire department aspect of it. Also because that has gone back so many years. Both these departments absolutely need these facilities. My concern is that if this is not, if we can't even have the departments united in this, how on earth are we going to get the entire community to vote for this? And
Well-
if it gets, my bigger fear is that if it gets turned down, that we would have to go through this process again. We've put the money into the design, the looking at the different land, all of that. And if this gets turned down, starting from scratch again?
Well, we wouldn't be starting from scratch, and to be quite honest with you, I don't know what will happen if this gets turned down. These buildings are critical. The
Absolutely.
design as it stands is a schematic design. It isn't at that point where we've spent the money on full development. But what this will do, the department heads, both DPW and fire, were in the room with the committee, with the consultants, with the architects, the engineers, and the owner's project manager, and we all agreed that $38.5 million in the reductions were necessary, or this project won't happen, period. This project, with that amount of money, will provide the DPW with everything they have now, plus an additional 3,000 plus square feet of building space. So everything that they have now, plus the equivalent of like 4 two-car garages on top of it. And it meets all of their needs, everything that they need as far as covered storage, space, new place to put salt and sand, gives them locker rooms, it gives them a break area in buildings that don't leak and that aren't going to fall down. The fire station, the same thing. This gives them everything that they need to provide the services of a modern-day fire department. A lot of the wants aren't there. We had to look, and that's how a committee works, and anybody who's been on a building committee knows that when they meet with the stakeholders, they ask, what is it that you want? What can we do? We look, this is what other communities have. And naturally, they're going to advocate for themselves and say, well, yes, we absolutely need the meeting room that can fit 40 people, and we absolutely need these extra rooms. We had to look at that and say, well, that's all well and good, but we can't afford that. And we have too many other things that are going to be coming up in the next few years. This, right now, is an opportune time. This is a great location. And
Why
that
is
price
it
quite
an
affordable.
opportune time right now?
Well, and my guess would be that in at least 2 years from now, you're going to see something coming down from South Shore Votech, maybe sooner. And we're going to end up having to tack that on.
But
And then you're going to see something coming from the schools, because your Beaverbrook and Woodsdale, not that they're outgrowing them, it's just that those buildings are old.
But so
And they're not
what's
going to last.
why is there, if it,
These buildings are not, they are in failure mode.
I 1,000% agree with you. For most of the time that I've been on here, I have been advocating, thank you, advocating for DPW, the building there on Central Street has been
You guys tore it.
just
You
as
saw it.
bad,
Yes.
but I've been here quite a while, and it's been bad the entire time. The fire station has equally been bad the entire time. So I absolutely, with everything in me, know that these buildings, my concern is what is going on that something's wrong if department heads that are on a building committee together one of them it doesn't appear to be supported. That's what I'm reading from that statement, is that there's a division there, and so the financial repercussion of that can be, is it not being supported because that department head doesn't believe that meets the needs? Is it not being supported?
To be fair, we've met several times. That department has had the opportunity to come in here and tell us that many, many times.
You know, I think there was definitely a feeling that, first of all, we are moving into the DPW space. That's where the potential for the fire station to go is. The original plan had called to move all of your administrative staff into this fire station headquarters, so they would have been in the same building. That was the first thing that we had to look at and say, the administrative staff now is in a very good building, great neighbors, right? It's not an old building. It has to be maintained because it is the main pump house for the sewer. So it's worked, there's plenty of parking, people show up there for park and rec. That was the first thing we said, that can't come out. I mean, that has to come out. They can stay there. They can stay there for the foreseeable future because it works, it's a good building, it's in good shape. The feeling may have been that, you know, they were giving up more on their side of the project than the fire was giving up.
No, I'm sure.
And that may have caused some problems at first,
I'm
but
gonna bet that
that's not.
but what I'm saying is, we're gonna try and get the townspeople to agree to this, and you can't get, I don't mean you, and we can't get the two departments that are going to be co-located to, it doesn't give a united, I think it needs to be a more,
Can we,
Just my
yeah,
opinion.
maybe other people know about this statement. I don't know anything about this
I'm
statement.
sorry. It was a statement that was posted on social media from the, I don't want to read the whole thing, it was pretty extensive, but in the statement, there was some, it was a statement from the chairman of the fire department building committee that just talked about that, was in response, I think, to, there must have been conversation going around, or, I don't know, it was in response to something that must have
It was
happened.
in response to chatter that he perceived on social media.
Right, so there must have been rumors or something going around, and he was trying to set the record straight, but in doing that, the sense that I took away from it, Matt, you read it? The sense,
No, I heard about it, I didn't actually.
But it was never in response to anything that was said from a DPW employee or a
so
DPW director.
if you read the statement, it's very evident that there's a tremendous amount of division between the two departments, or not the departments themselves, but the building aspect of this project. There seems to be a tremendous amount of, or not a full buy-in by everybody that's on there. And if we're looking for the people in town to fully buy into this project, I think that the two departments, I don't know what you have to do to, like,
Do we know if there really is division, or is this just social media?
well, so the people that were working on that committee together was the head of that committee making the statement. And so that's what I'm asking.
No, you know, as far as the DPW director goes, again, he was in the meeting with us. He left the meeting with us that we had when we had pared down the project, and he was in agreement with the rest of us. It had to be pared down. That's what we had to do. How it got
And
relayed
has there
to
not
other folks.
has there not been follow-up since then?
Yes, actually,
It's
we've
not-
met with him, and
because-
we've showed him new layouts. We've given everybody a better idea of
And
what's
are
going
you
on there.
getting input from that department as to, this is what we need, this is what we don't need? We can't
Absolutely.
do with this, we can't do with, we can't
Absolutely.
do with this. So then, why aren't, like, we haven't had any of that. I don't.
Well, you're
feel
not the
like-
building committee. We
No,
would
no,
have
no, no, no.
brought him
But
here
you,
that way.
like you had just said, they've come here several times, but not,
Well, I mean, the chairman, he came as chairman, and why, I won't speak for, you know, why John Stone hasn't come to the meetings. But I will say this, you know, the project as it is it needs to be done. And there will be, you know, this is a building or a set of buildings and a project that will last a lot longer than the folks that are going to be occupying it and the folks that are sitting here right now.
and that's why I'm concerned that
And they-
in such dire need that I can't be the only person that saw the, that sees the.
Yeah, Greg, please.
Thank you, appreciate it. One, this has nothing to do with the topic at hand right here, but the response to the threat yesterday is completely embarrassing for our town. We just spent $100 million on a school and can't figure out how to text the parents a coherent statement to what's actually going on. That needs to get fixed today, not like next week. I don't even understand how it's not.
Great.
how it's possible.
That'd be better for the
Can
school
we
committee.
stay on
wouldn't it?
agenda?
Yeah, Greg, let's
please?
move on from that. I appreciate that.
What?
I said, let's move on from that topic and the topic
Yeah,
at
but it needs
hand.
to be on the record somewhere, because people, I mean, this is, it's
School committee was last night.
Two, this entire thing is like dealing with my kids. Two kids in a sandbox need to be able to play together nice. That's what's going on right now. It's just not happening. And if everybody doesn't see it, we had a guy coming in yesterday, I'm not really, last week, not really, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was. Not really sure who he is. I guess he's a councilman or selectman. whatever it is, and he gives a hard sale on OPEB, which it's like yelling out at somebody, look, squirrel. It doesn't even make sense. All of these things are too hard of a sale. None of it makes sense to say, in a building, which I have the plans for, which I don't know if they're on the board or not, in an entire building, a little corner of the building is taken out, and that's DPW. I don't know what's wrong, what the issue is, but just look on the piece of paper. Like, none of this makes any sense. Unfortunately, whoever the department heads are, one should definitely have a talking to, because they shouldn't be speaking on social media. CEOs, big, people that run companies, whatever it is, they're usually not good on social media because things can come up like this. They say things that people don't agree with. So maybe that needs to be a town rule going forward, that they don't put stuff out there that ends up coming back to bite them in the ass a week later. Second, I don't know how we can't get everybody on the same page. Both places need to, what happened to one building? Like, what's the issue? There's something off. None of it makes any sense. I'm not really sure what it is. My 100% vote is no, and so we can figure out how to fix stuff where people can get things done in a timely manner. And who said no to 58 million?
Me. And I assure you that the town would say no to 58 million as well.
Well, how do you know? You don't know. Nobody knows. It's a ridiculous statement to say one number is going to get approved and one's not. Both places need something. This was something that was brought in later on to say, yes, we do need this. But the real reason isn't that Greg brought it up one day and it sounds like a good idea. It's because you guys need the land now. We went and we put all our eggs in one basket over on a piece of land that we couldn't build on. So, these are decisions that need to be thought out way ahead of time, and they're not being done. It needs to change. All of these little things need to change. And yes, two department heads should definitely be on the same page and be happy with whatever they're getting. If a building's getting put up, one of them takes a cut, the other one takes the same cut, or very close. Not one of them takes a 60% cut, and another one takes a 12% cut. It just doesn't make sense.
Greg, I just want to correct it. It wasn't the department head that had made a statement. It was a building committee chairman that made a statement. I just want to make sure that
Isn't it the
that's
same
clear.
person?
No, it's
No,
not the same
it's not.
person.
Well, isn't it the guy who sat in front of us the other day?
He's not the department head. He's the
Well, it
building.
doesn't matter. I'm just saying, the guy who people are sending to come sit in front of us shouldn't be putting on social media issues that he has. He has to work them out with Scott and work them out with the other department head. That's what being a grown-up does.
Anything else, Greg?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Thank you.
So there are multiple buildings involved here. It wasn't just that we took the DPW out of one building. We did take them out of the main fire station, but there is a second set of buildings, and there's a very large part of it is all DPW.
Again, I don't know. I'm just going from what I read in that statement. To me.
Yes, and they have to build on that, by the way. So all we're doing is pushing a can down the road of a building that has to get built out later on. At least that's what was said at the last meeting that I was in, that these guys can build on to whatever.
I
Well,
did
I don't know
ask.
if we're
I had
expecting-
asked about.
They're designed for future growth.
Right.
They will be built with full amenities for each building, but they will also be designed for future growth.
But let's be fair, let's be honest, it's like, future growth, that's not gonna happen.
Well,
We have no plan for
Yeah.
it. To sit there and say, oh, yeah, it's in the future, like, that's not gonna happen, that's a pipe dream. We have no plan. And that's the problem I have with this, is way this has all been pulled together, we get to a certain point, and then all of a sudden, decisions are made, 58 isn't good enough, so 38. We're sitting here tonight as a finance committee. We've seen one financial document related to this project. One. That's it.
I don't know what.
There's one that was from March, and now there's one from August. We're a finance committee. That's what we've seen, one document related to this. There's nothing else to see. I don't get, I mean, I have a list of things where it's like, I just don't understand that, that financial overview that you gave us the other day, I mean, that changed, there was March 21st, there was one, then we got one on August 30th. Yeah, that one there. So there was a decrease of almost $20 million and a reduction in space of 20,000 square feet. Decrease in space of 6,047 square feet for the fire, decrease in space for 13,900 square feet for DPW. And that's all we got. There's no explanation to it, there was nothing the last time we were here. A committee was formed to put a proposal together, and that committee did their job. They put forward a proposal of $58 million, went to the town. Town came and you said, no, that's not good enough. I don't understand, why didn't you just step in back in March when you knew it was $58 million? Why did it happen back in August to reduce it to $38 million? And that committee, so within a month of the proposal coming out, it was gutted. And that committee, according to the last meeting that we had, was abolished. That was a term that was used in the meeting. Then we're also getting into, again, this is about finance. I'm not getting into personalities with people. I agree with Greg that somebody needs to be adults. But we're proposing and Andrew, do you have that schedule that I have, that I provided? You presented something to us in May. This year's funding for retirement is $3.7 million. And that's what's been presented at different things. I want to understand, can somebody please explain to me how we're going to deal with these increases over the next 5 years? In year 5, but we're being told, hey, $3.7 million, that's what we're going to be paying. No, in 2029, we're going to be paying $5.3 million. Where's the budget line item for that? And this is on top of the fact that this past year, the Plymouth County Retirement System lost $110 million. How does that affect our funding now? How does I'd like somebody to understand that. And then, can you scroll down a little bit? And then we have the issue that I brought up in May about PERAC, who oversees all the state retirement systems. They're saying, Plymouth County, you should not be using 7.875. You should be using 7, and I went back and did this, so it's $230 million. Abington's piece would be another $8.3 million. So how does that factor into this if we want to get fully funded? So in 2029, we don't have this big number at us. There's no explanation, and this is the problem I have. There's no explanation for this. Again, the Finance Committee has one document. That's what we have to go on. We have nothing else. But we're being presented with this. So look at the increases. So, all I want to say here is, I know I'm a little excited about this, but it's like, what I'm presenting, these are the facts. I'm not making this stuff up. This is all public information. That's how I got it.
Paul, can I jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
Not knowing anything about what Paul just spoke about, because about an accountant, actuary, none of that stuff. Him and Chris have a way better understanding than all of it. But somebody who comes to the meeting last week that, again, no big deal that I don't know who he is, but I have no idea who he is, who sits down and has an argument with Paul about some OPEB thing, about what year all this stuff is going to come off, doesn't really help anybody feel good, because all of a sudden you have not really a great salesman coming in trying to sell something that nobody even understands what he's actually talking. Again, it's, oh, we're going to have extra money to pay for this. But the point was, the point that everybody in this meeting has made is, how did we get from 58 to 38? That's the question. Why are we doing this? Why is one department taking a 50% cut, the other one's taking a 20% cut? Those are the questions, we don't need to be sold. Thanks.
But my concern, Greg, is I appreciate what you're saying on that, but my concern is on the financial side. It's like, we don't have a plan in this town for anything. I don't know what our plan is to even fund the $38 million, because what we're trying to say is, hey, when we're fully funded in 2029, we have an offset of $3.7 million, which isn't. Because, Andrew, can you scroll down to I think it's page, is it this? Yeah, this one here. So we want to put confidence in the Plymouth County retirement system. And this is their funding ratio, again, public information from 2006 to 2021. Look at the funded liability, how it's gone up from. So we think in 15 years, this organization hasn't gone over 61.7% for fully funded, but in 6 years, they're gonna be fully funded. And this is the same organization that in 2022, based on their audit, they lost $110 million. I mean, this is a pipe dream, and again, this is my concern, it's like, I would rather see the town push this vote off for a year, because it's like, we're not ready, that's the way I look at it. I don't think the town financially is prepared for this. I mean, you've got a retirement system that, like, sorry, but you're not cutting it. They haven't, I mean, look at the numbers from 2006.
Can I just say that 110 million, 2022 loss, that's market-driven, you realize that, I assume. It's, every pension had a similar
Absolutely.
percentage, yes.
Right, but.
And it's gonna happen.
Right, but Plymouth County, Chris, is the only, if you ranked them, because you go into PERAC, there's only one retirement system in the state that's at 7.85%.
Yeah.
It's Plymouth County.
I don't disagree with that.
I mean,
I just want to point out that the 110 million isn't, they made some mistake. That's just, the market just went the wrong way.
I get it, but okay, so I'll push back on that, then. What's the impact to the town? We don't know.
Yes.
And that's my problem with us going forward with this. There's a lot of unknowns.
You're right.
And I'll try to, this last thing. And then, so on August 8, 2023, Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll put out a press release. And they made it noted, historic investments in schools, higher education, affordability, climate resiliency, and local aid. Fully funded of the Student Opportunity Act, including $594 million, or a 9.9% increase, Chapter 70 funding. The Abington Public Schools rely on that. So we do this. What's the impact to the schools if all of a sudden that increase doesn't continue and the funding is flat? What happens? We're in trouble. We're cutting people. But we think we're in financial good shape to go forward with funding this project. I just don't think, I'll just conclude with this, is like, I think we need to, we can't go forward with this. We need to figure out what the reality of funding the retirement is. We need to do complete the FY24 budget, understand where we are with Chapter 70 money. I mean, because again, the state is paying $45 million a year to help support migrants coming into this. That's almost $500 million. Where's that money coming from? What if we continue to do that into next year? It has to trickle down to the local cities and towns. And again, I'm a broken record on this one. The town's got financial policies from 2006. And we think we're in a good position. There's absolutely no doubt that the town needs this. But this isn't the way to go about it. I think we're just slapping this thing together. We put together a plan, the committee delivered it, went to the town, and decisions were made to say, hey, no, we don't want 58, we're going to 38. I don't know why somebody didn't tell the committee months and months ago that, hey, 58 isn't going to cut it. Who put the committee together? If that was you, Scott, then why weren't you telling people, hey, listen.
The committee was put together before I got here. This committee's been working on this for
4 years.
4+ years.
Yeah.
Right, okay, but let me ask you this, though. So on this sheet that you gave us from March 2003, you saw that.
Yep.
You said nothing about it until August.
No, that's not exactly true.
I'm gonna
But-
assume too
but-
that
but I'm
the
just saying,
conversation.
things happen.
But Paul,
Yeah.
you have to, I believe what Scott was trying to do during that time, correct me if I'm wrong, it has to be sellable to everyone in town, right? So
Right.
people on that fixed income, when Scott's looking at the breakdown of what it's going to cost the average homeowner, and people on a fixed income, is it feasible? Are they going to be able to pay for that? And is that gonna be able to pass? Because we need the buildings, we have to do something.
I don't disagree.
And so something's better than nothing, and so if we have to pare it back, I understand all of that, and I want to make it palatable for everyone in the community, affordable, doable for everyone in the community, because it is so needed.
Yeah.
But I feel like something's up, that there's just not, there's signs that are saying, that I noticed signs that say, support your firefighters. It's a fire station DPW building.
Yeah,
We're
I
looking
got one in the mail
for,
today. It's like, it doesn't say
it just
anything
doesn't
about
seem,
having fire.
I don't know what
fire
the issue
DPW.
is. I just know from reading that statement, I had a very different feeling at the meeting last week when I left. If we had taken a sense of the meeting, which by the way, I'm glad that we didn't. If we had taken a sense of the meeting, at that meeting, I felt comfortable. I did. I felt comfortable at the 38 number. I felt comfortable that I could, in good conscience, say to the townspeople, I agree with this. Because I believed that this was an all-on-board thing. And so it was surprising to see that it's not an all-on-board thing. And now, so of course, after reading that, I'm, kind of thinking back, and like Marty said, wait a minute, John wasn't at the meeting.
Can I ask a question?
Which I didn't even think of that night. I don't know if anyone else did.
When did it become the fire station / DPW? Because historically, wasn't it just the fire station?
It started out
Right.
as
And we had the
Fire Station
opportunity.
Building Committee.
Right, we had the opportunity to add some increased DPW.
Yep.
So, great. DPW is getting something. And are we sacrificing good chasing perfection? And are we really going to vote and tell our firefighters that the building that they live in, that is one really bad storm away from collapsing, that we're going to ask you to wait another year?
I completely agree. I'm looking for buy-in from everybody,
Which building you
and I
talking
want to know
about?
why there isn't.
Which one?
But you said something's.
Station 1 or Station 2? I don't know what you're talking about.
You just said something, they're one storm away from.
Yeah, Station 1, our headquarters could be, Station 2 could be. They could definitely be one storm away. DPW could be one storm away. That's the whole point, and that's been mentioned several times.
They're an awful, both both buildings, the fire station on Route 18.
Headquarters on Route 18.
And the Central Street, where we're putting thousands of dollars worth of equipment in that fire station, thousands of dollars worth of equipment at that DPW. We need to be good stewards of the equipment and, things that the townspeople are paying for.
Yep.
We also, though, need to be good employers to the
So-
people that are working for the town. And so, like I said, I had a very different feeling at the last meeting than I do after reading the statement and feeling like this is not, and everybody's working toward this together.
So I know
Okay.
Dan had a
And-
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just jump in real quick. So I do disagree with Paul and Greg's description of the cutting from 58 to 38. I believe truly that it was done in good faith because there was a
I never
recognition.
questioned that.
I thought you did.
I
I
didn't
mean-
question the good faith effort. I questioned the process.
Okay, or the timing of it. I think there was a recognition of the cost that it was going to happen to each individual taxpayer, and that there was a concerted effort to figure out how can we get what we need for DPW and the fire department without spending too much, as much money. So I just want to.
Right, but for me, whether it's $38 or $58 million, I just don't like the process we're going. I think we can't tell taxpayers that in 2029, that we're, this, for one, it's not $3.7 million a year. That's, Andrew showed us that in May. But we can't tell them that there's gonna be an offset to this, the issuing of this debt
Right.
in 2020. That's not.
And that aside, because I think it's pretty clear that it was an effort to soften the blow of the cost of this. I agree with you. I don't think we should count on that at all. And what I think is really important is that when folks do go to vote for this, and us here too tonight, the realization that it's going to be on our backs as taxpayers in this town.
Right.
Like, we are going to pay for this. There's not going to be a reduction in our taxes in the future. The revenue of property taxes is an addiction, and it will always go up. It'll never go down. So we just need to recognize that as we make our vote for this, that in supporting our fire department and our DPW folks, we are accepting that we're going to pay for it.
And so,
Again, for
just,
me, it's still.
sorry, Paul, real
Okay.
quick, I wanted to just say that the biggest thing for me is, like Barbara was saying, like Paul was saying, Marty, Dan, everyone, we absolutely need these buildings. We absolutely need to improve the conditions for both the fire station and the DPW. My fear in this that I've expressed to several of you outside of meetings and to several other people around town outside of meetings is that with the state that we are in with the project, it will not pass when we go to a vote of the town. And that's my biggest concern with this, because anyone who's gone into the fire station or into the cinder block building for the DPW knows that those are not modern buildings that cannot support the people that we have working for us and protecting us here in town. We need to be providing them with the best possible plan. And I do think that having strong support from both departments is important to selling it to the rest of the town. And I want this to succeed, and my feeling as it sits on, what's today, September 27th? My feeling is that it's not going to pass a vote of the town, and that's what I'm worried about.
It shouldn't affect the vote of this committee. I think you have to vote,
Well, but.
whether you think it's a good
My
project or not.
my feeling is it's not gonna pass because of a lot of the things, like Paul said, we haven't seen a lot of the financial documents. We haven't seen, like, we just got kind of the breakdown of what got taken out in going from 58 to 38, and the ability to understand, both for us and for people watching and people who are going to come out and vote, the ability to understand what's in the project, what's out of the project, and what the benefit is.
And
It's
that
like
I-
Daniel said, it is going to be on the dime of the taxpayers of the town.
And that if the
to-
department heads feel that that is something that's going to carry them, I want to know that if I'm recommending to the townspeople, like,
Yeah.
you know, you're going to build
And-
this, and then you don't need to worry about, you know, we're not going to come back in 5 years and say this doesn't work at all.
It's important things to say, like Scott said at the beginning of the discussion. DPW has a very good building on Summer Street. Is it Summer Street, or I don't know what the official address is. A very good building on Summer Street that can house their administration. That taking them out of the new building is not, hey, we need to cut it, so we're throwing DPW. It's, they have a building that
It's
one
safe and
is,
sound.
one is good, it's safe, it's newer, and we have to keep it because of the pump that's there. That's an important factor to say. This wasn't like, hey, DPW is late to the project, so we're taking their stuff out, that's the first to go. It's, this makes sense, and this is why it was done. And those kind of things, I think they haven't been incredibly well explained throughout the past several months.
Can we resolve Barbara's issue simply by getting John Stone, the fire chief, and
The building.
Derek, John Stone's the building, right? And anybody else who
I
we,
meant the building committee.
the building
Yeah,
committee.
So the
Get them
DPW
here,
had the fire
yeah,
head and
right.
building
Get them here and have them all say, rather than listen to, as Greg said,
Right.
social media, and, you know, maybe Derek was responding to something that didn't really get said. We don't know. I don't know. Anyway, can they just stand up and say, yes, we support, we are getting what we need? To Greg's point about they should get equal cut, no, they shouldn't get equal cut. I disagree with that completely, because the fire department's cut, they cut to get to the 58. But, and even so, you cut what you can cut, not, it doesn't have to be equal, it has to be, they have to get what they need. And as long as they say that, I'm not gonna question them.
The cuts that were made weren't just done
Right.
with- without regard. I mean, they were very thoughtful, and we were very careful to make sure that everybody would be able to provide the services that they need to provide. They would have protection for their equipment that they need and for their people. All of that was considered. You know, I've probably done $20 million worth of projects in my past. Every committee comes down to some point where that committee put everything together, and it's a beautiful, wonderful project, but it's not always practical.
Right.
A lot of times, you have to do this, and it's just the
I think we
progression
can
of
do
how
If
this
they
works.
have a training place for them in this, do they have to have the training place?
Don't we have a training place at the police station?
That was
Yes.
significantly reduced in the.
No, I'm just asking, on the thing that I saw, the last one for 38 million is a training. There's a big training thing upstairs, or whatever, I don't know. Again, I'm not a builder, but again, these are the things I'm talking about, and I agree with Chris, it doesn't have to be 50-50. But like, it shouldn't really be an incredible difference, in my opinion. Because one side will always feel like they're getting kicked in the face.
But remember, the needs of a fire department and the needs of a DPW facility are significantly different. And also remember that there's a very large, modern maintenance facility that's on that site that the DPW and Highway Department have now, that is staying there.
I completely agree, I don't have it. All I'm saying is, do they need from what I understood, the training things for other towns to come here and train?
That was significantly reduced.
I know, I'm just asking if they have it currently, and if they don't have it.
No, they don't
currently,
have
why
it
they have to
currently.
have it going forward. That's a big piece of this entire place. It's actually a huge room, if you look at the schematic that I was given.
So they don't have it currently.
My point is,
Greg.
listen, I'm not here to like nitpick on every single thing, but like, we're taking a box out of a department that was in a building and then leaving a training room that's 4 times or 3 times the size of it. Like, I don't know, man. Again, I'm annoyed about yesterday way more than I am about this. So sorry if I come across a little bit too annoyed, but I
School
am.
department.
But this is something that like, these should be easily fixable things. We do not need a place to train other fire departments. We do not need it, period. Like, let's just move on, take that out of the equation. Maybe that saves a lot more where we can put offices in somewhere or whatever. But like, I don't know, it's just like, everything that they have in there is not everything they need. And again, to say that one place takes a huge cut and the other one doesn't, I don't know, I'll never agree with it, because there's always I'm not saying to like not have oxygen tanks or decontamination things. I'm the one who said make sure that they have the car wash thing that they need.
Greg.
My point is, I think that we can do better.
Greg, I wouldn't want Greg telling the fire department what they do, no offense, Greg. I don't want Greg telling the fire department what they do and don't need, right? In the same way, I would want the fire department to say, this is what we know we need, because we do our job every day. And so we got that information from them. I want to hear that my DPW, I keep wanting to call them the highway department. I want to hear that my DPW, this is what we need, this is what we can, just like we heard from the fire department. I want to hear, I want to know that that's,
Can you just call up a fence looker and see if he...
that it's not, it's the same thing, it's like Greg telling the fire department what they need. is somebody telling the highway department the DPW what
No,
they need?
That's not true.
Or-
I'm not telling
or-
them what they need. I'm
because-
telling them they don't need a training center. 'Cause everything
No,
we're
I get it, Greg, I was making a,
I do think it's important. I know that that's really important to you, that they see eye to eye and they're both
well,
happy.
it's not that no, that's not important to me at all, honestly. I want it to, I don't, know what I mean
I
is,
understand what you're saying,
like,
and if you'd like to put your vote off till,
I want to
Wednesday,
know
that'd
that,
be your drop dead date.
I want to know that what we're building, what we're recommending to the townspeople to agree to build is workable, doable, what they need. Is there a reason that there's that division? Is it because something isn't the way that it should be on their end? I don't know.
Or are
We're also
we perceiving a
speculating that
division
it's
that's not
division.
actually
Or-
there?
Absolutely.
Blame social media.
Yeah.
But
Are we
listen,
perceiving a
this
division
was-
that's not actually there?
This was a statement from the committee chairman. This wasn't like, banter back and
Just a
forth
couple of
on,
people in town.
yeah, this was a statement that was put out by the chairman of the building committee. And I want to know that if, I want this project to go forward. I just want to know that it is what the DPW needs. I don't know why they're not.
And just to be clear,
As-
I
as-
also want this project to go forward. I just want everybody to be happy. And there's just no way they're happy.
I mean, this is why I'm on social media, because I don't know what we're talking about here, but I still go back to, we're a finance committee, and it's like, we can ask all these questions we want, but it's like, we're
What
gonna
other
approve.
Yeah,
financial,
Paul,
what do you
wanted
think we
to
have
bring that up too.
for
is
finance?
At this
Well-
stage, there isn't much for financial document, until there was an approval and then a bid process and all that stuff. There's, at least
I mean,
from my
this kinda
experience
breaks
in
it down by
construction software, there's not
this is
much.
really all there is.
So-
Is it-
Square foot
so
counts.
how much have we paid over the last 3 or 4 years to get to this point?
Probably a couple $1 million easy.
I was gonna say.
Okay, so just be with me. So we've spent a couple $1 million for this.
Well, it's the
That's it.
design.
Well,
There's
yeah,
a
I think
lot
you're
to it.
kind of,
No, I'm not, and I had to ask for this.
I think that's a bit disingenuous, because we did have plans done.
Okay, which
Site
even, I
studies.
get that, but we had plans for what, $58 million?
Multiple.
Multiple.
you got schematics, you got them for 38 million.
A plan for
But we didn't have a
$33
$38 million
originally,
plan until
And then a
August.
plan for Glenowitz, and then a plan for Central.
Site
Right, I'm not trying to be
studies.
disingenuous, but I don't like, I don't want what I'm supposed to make of this when
So-
I get this to support the firefighters and the DPW and the taxpayers, I get that, but it's like, I'm being asked to say, like, was this a good project going forward with, I don't know what Chapter 70 is gonna be, when we've got a state budget, we don't know how it's going. We've got a retirement system that we have commitments that we have to make. We don't, like, I feel like there's a lot of unknowns here that, like, we're gonna throw this on, and it's like, they're gonna do another actuarial evaluation report in January, right? So we'll know in January where we stand as far as our liability.
But there'll still be
So,
unknowns,
it's not gonna
Paul.
change
So,
this project.
So,
There'll always be unknowns.
But it's the funding of it, it's where the town
point,
is.
to that point, Paul, I think this goes back to what Dan was saying a few minutes back. We can't count on the pension payments coming off of the books anytime soon. We have to account for this project as being on top of our existing budget and our existing
Obligations.
obligations. That's the word I was looking for.
Right, but what was presented to us, though, and nobody corrected them, is $3.7 million, and where's the 40% increase?
I think you and Chris both argued that right away when that was.
Well, it's also hard to
when that
argue when you
was
don't have facts in front of you and you're presenting.
presented.
So.
So I think to try to look at it whole picture, I think the presentation of the looking at 5 years, 6 years out retirement fund was saying, at the time that we start paying for this, there is the possibility that this other money will be coming off that might balance it out. We don't know what the state revenues, the local receipts, property taxes are gonna look like 2 years from now, or like we might have some kind of idea what they're gonna look like next year. But, I mean, we're not in the crystal ball business. The economy could go through the roof, the economy could tank completely, and we're having different conversations whichever way that goes. And we're gonna have to deal with whichever of those things happen. The question we have to ask right now is, on top of everything else that we have and that we're looking at right now, is this the right thing to do with the taxpayers of this town's money? And is this, the article in the warrant that's being put for us, the right plan for this project right now?
And
moving
to
forward?
add to that before Paul jumps in, there's been a committee of people who are going to live in this building who put this together. There's been years and years of plans. We have the numbers in front of us. There was a reduction, a good faith reduction in the cost to the taxpayers. And everybody I'm assuming everybody's happy with it because we haven't heard otherwise, except for whatever on social media.
Firsthand, we
Right.
haven't heard of this.
And we know, and everybody can admit here, honestly, that we know the buildings need to be replaced. We know it's going to benefit the town. But I just think ultimately, we just need to understand as a committee and also as a town, we're gonna pay for it. There's not gonna be some bailout in the future that if we want this for our DPW and our fire department, we need to accept that we're gonna pay for it out of our property taxes. And I'm
To
gonna-
that
that's my
point,
last statement.
the fact that this is taking so long is a good thing, because it's like, we're having these discussions all in good faith, right? Like, nobody wants us to be like, yeah, sure, whatever, and wave our hand at the magical $28 million. But we should probably make a decision on this tonight.
Yeah.
We should probably go into next, tomorrow, next week, Wednesday is our final.
Your final
It's the
chance
last
to-
day.
It's the last day before we have to
Yeah.
publish.
Before we have to publish.
Technically, we can change our recommendation up until right before town.
I mean,
So,
And the last time we met, I was on the other side of this. My biggest concern is it's gonna cost us more if we don't. If things start to fall apart and we're having to pull money from other
Same here.
places
About to say
to
that.
just put a Band-Aid on things. And then if you look back to the document I wrote up for this committee this year, I stressed I did not want to add more debt, to
what does
our
next
debt.
year look like for this?
But my concern is it's gonna be even more debt in the future, plus the Band-Aids that we have to put on these buildings. So, yeah.
So,
100%.
okay, two things I'd like an understanding on. So Andrew, when you presented to us in May, you used an interest rate of 5%. This new plan is using 3%. How's that possible in this climate? Somebody answer that, Scott or Andrew? Because honestly, that, you're playing with the numbers now. And then the other thing too is there's a negative $1.4 million adjustment. That was not on the 50 original, but it's on this one. And it does get the project under $40 million.
I didn't put those numbers together.
So there is a balance left of money that was appropriated of the 1.4 million left. That's already been appropriated.
But that reduces the,
what we're gonna ask.
Yeah.
We don't, yeah, so we won't be.
but we didn't know about that much.
I think at
was a
that
question.
point, the assumptions on that was that we were gonna keep going into design development. And we weren't, after we saw the number of 58 million, it was not gonna go into design development.
And then the interest rate, how do we,
And the interest rate is probably closer to 3.5, I think we discussed. At that time, we hadn't gotten our bond numbers, we hadn't gotten our ratings. I think the latest that we ran was probably was 3, but it's probably gonna be closer to 3.5. So it won't be much more than that 0.62 cents.
so where did the 5 come from? in
Well, I
May?
think we were just trying to put something out there, being as conservative as we can, and that's why we started with that.
So we're less conservative now with the 3?
We have a much better idea of what.
Because the 3 would put us over, if we went up to 5, that would put us over $40 million.
No, but we have a much better idea. We just went through and talked to the bonding companies, and we're much more comfortable with that. And
Oh, wow, it was the longest pause yet. Any other discussion?
Well, I just say off the top of my head, 3 to 3.5 probably adds about 5% to the cost on a present value basis.
Yeah, and what would 5 do?
That's a wild guess, an old rule of thumb.
Greg, you there? Any other discussion?
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is the 38 million isn't really 38 million. It's 38 million plus, again, what, I'm bad with names. Who was the guy that was sitting there from the fire department?
Derek?
Derek. What he said last week was they could build on from there when they need to. That it's going to cost more money.
no, the idea is
I
that
don't
we
really know what that
situated the
means.
buildings that they could be added onto if needed in the future.
Yeah, I think, Greg,
No,
the design of it.
There's overhangs for cars, right? Like, what are the two big wings on the
That's
sides?
a DPW building, and that's something that DPW requested, that for certain pieces of equipment that didn't have to be inside, there are canopies that you could put equipment under.
Yeah, Greg, it's, the layout's designed that when all of your marijuana money comes in, we can add to it. So it's not like already going to be baked in. like-
Greenhouse
And the,
potential.
and the naval base money.
And the naval base money, that's right.
Yeah, and my point was, at some point, like, there's, a big building, it's going to cost more money. I don't think they're gonna keep an entire building empty, right? I just remember Derek telling me they can build onto it.
I had asked if there was room for expansion.
Right.
If they left room for expansion, because we're
Yeah.
cutting down on the square footage, so I asked if they left room for expansion.
Yeah, Greg, I
But
don't,
again, I don't think that's true, because if everything keeps getting bigger, like every other department does, is there extra space in Summer Street? Well, guess what? The other building, that's the white cinder block building, is going away, so now it's just the Summer Street building. So, I'm assuming they're gonna go to that newer building with the overhangs, and that, it's going to cost more money. I just want, my point is, it's never gonna end. I liked the $58 million thing, because it did everything that we talked about and we've been talking about for a while. If things were maybe done in a little bit of a better way, instead of this card that I received in the mail today, it would have had an explanation of what the entire project was doing, not just supporting firefighters, which obviously everybody wants to do. It's a play on like people's heartstrings. I don't like it, and I'd love to vote on this now or wait next week, whatever you guys want.
Oh, yeah, we're going to vote on it tonight. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I'm just really torn. As we sit here tonight, Scott, you would say that this building, you've had these conversations with the DPW?
We had the conversation.
It was a joint effort to get to this?
Yep. And again, if you want them in here, I'll ask them to come in on the 4th. It's up to you folks. I think this is the best that we can do.
I just hate to see that we've put so much time, effort, and money into this, because what happens if this does not pass?
Well, if it doesn't pass, then they're gonna have to go back to square one, but the project is not going to get cheaper.
Right.
There's
But-
nothing,
and
there's
with-
nothing else to cut out of this project
Right.
either, at this point. This is pretty much it.
There's an entire
But then
training
we'd have to-
section
it
of
would-
this thing that could get cut out, number one.
Well, we end up
It's
then
not
going
easy.
back to, you'd have to do
Yeah, I
that.
talked to like 5 other
Put the
towns that
money
don't
in
have
again
training
for a
centers. and it's like,
redesign,
it's
right?
not-
Yeah, if it doesn't pass, I think we'd probably reform a committee to look at it and try and come up
Because
with a
now
new
we put all
plan,
that money,
but
and then that money's
there's
just
still-
gone.
There's still money here.
But I mean, the money that we've spent for this
Well,
design,
if you're going,
it doesn't,
it's not schematic at this point, so no, it isn't a big waste. There's just further reductions, but I don't know where else we can make the reductions other than a meeting room that I think has already been reduced. And there's living space above that meeting room, so it doesn't actually take off square footage, and that's where your money is. We're not gonna save money. I think they reduced one of the bays already. So there isn't anywhere else to squeeze this project. This is a piece of property that we actually own. We're not buying any more property. This, you know, it accounts for the salt shed, it accounts for a much larger dry storage facility for the vehicles. It accounts for DPW quarters, bathrooms, break rooms. It accounts for everything that the fire department needs. There's nothing else that we can take out of this. There's nothing else that I'd want to take out of it.
But
I
it
have
meets the
nothing
needs,
else.
it meets
It
the
meets
needs.
the needs of
for
both of these departments.
And both departments have
Have
said,
seen this,
is-
they looked at it, and they
I-
understand
And
it.
I support this.
Yeah.
They both support this.
Yeah. And, you know, whatever we gotta do to get them.
Chris, can I borrow your pen, please?
Sure.
One of the things I will
Sarah.
say, Barbara, oh no, Sarah,
Oh, that's
you
right.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we heard last meeting that this new building will meet the needs of fire for the foreseeable future, like, 50-plus years. Now that we're talking, I don't recall hearing that for DPW. Are you confident that it's sustainable for at least the foreseeable
Yeah,
future?
I mean, absolutely. It's a brand-new building. It's much larger than their current facility by, like I said, almost 3,000 square feet as it's projected right now. So, yeah, it's going to be designed to last 50 years anyways. And, again, there'll be thoughtful way that we'll situate it on the site, that if we do have to add on, we would always have that ability. But again, like, I don't see it in my future here. I think this is kind of something that we're going to build it, and this is what they're going to be living in for quite some time.
Could we recommend, can I make a move? Is this allowed before I make a motion?
Well, there's a
Can-
motion already.
can-
Yeah,
oh,
we're in the middle of a
Oh,
motion.
so I can't, never mind.
No, I mean, you can ask. me.
Well, I was
What's
gonna
the
say, can we recommend approval pending, and we always meet just before the town meeting, pending confirmation from DPW that they support,
So I was actually gonna point out,
rather than
we
having
can
come in.
vote tonight, and we can reopen and change our vote at
Thank you.
either a meeting next week and still have it published, or the meeting right before town meeting, and announce in the meeting that our vote has been altered in one way or another. So voting tonight is not a final binding vote for us. It could be a final binding vote. We can reopen it if we
But
so choose.
is that really fair to John Stone, though? To put him on the spot like that because somebody put something out on social media? I feel like Scott's spoken for John, and if John has an issue with it, he would go to Scott to say, hey, listen, I'm uncomfortable
fine.
putting John Stone on the spot like that. I just think I don't think it's good.
I
Good practice.
I think of it more along the lines of giving him an opportunity rather than putting him on the spot. But I do think, obviously, Scott is doing his job in working both departments and trying to make sure that both departments are being taken care of in this, so.
I mean, I tend to agree with Paul in that, Scott has demonstrated, or has told us very bluntly that both parties are happy with the plan.
I didn't say happy. They were happy at 58 million.
Well, yeah,
But
yeah,
neither of them are.
Support, they're saying
are
that
met,
there's support.
I guess.
Yes, they both understand, and they both realized, and like I said, it was actually a very good meeting, and they both understood, and they both realized that at the end of it, we were going to meet their needs,
yeah.
and that it was doable, according to our consultants, at that $38.5 million.
And then as far as an opportunity, I mean, there's been plenty of opportunities to voice concern from that department, so I'm leaning toward taking the vote tonight. And then if something comes up between now and, we're going to meet anyway, day of, because there's going to be a word change somewhere, I know it.
At least one.
Yeah, and so we can have the discussion then, if that's the case. And then, as Matt pointed out, we can make that announcement during town meeting that there's a change to our vote,
If there is.
if there is. Does that work for everybody? Greg, does that work for you?
To vote on it now, and then if there's changes, to vote on it again the day before or the day of, something like that?
Day of, yep.
But yeah, I'm good with either.
Cool. Any other discussion?
I just want to say, before we vote, that I recognize that we need both, and I was happier when we were at $58 million when everybody got what they wanted. But I understand the burden it puts on there, but I don't want my vote to reflect that, like, I'm not supportive of the fire or the DPW. I have real concerns with the information that I have to this point, that I can't make informed decision on this, and so I'll just put it out there, I'll be the first one to vote for the new committee after this town meeting.
Any other discussion? So the current motion is in favor of recommending approval of Article 5, funding of fire station and DPW building project. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No?
Yes.
So no, Greg?
Greg and Paul.
Okay. Well, so currently we have recommended as a committee to recommend approval of Article 5. All right. Next on the agenda. And I do appreciate, like, the conversation tonight, even though it's 10 o'clock, has been really good. I appreciate
Reserved for
that.
budget season at the end.
What is left here? Any liaison reports? Yeah,
I just want to mention one thing. No, I'm not. No, I'm good.
Get it off your shoulders. No, don't.
No.
No liaison reports.
Oh, let me just give you a quick manager liaison report, just a nice update. Some good news is that we did receive a $200,000 grant from the Green Communities today that will actually fund retrofitting the AC, or replacing the AC units all at the senior center.
Oh, nice.
So that is really good news. In that, we're actually going to ask Allison Sullivan for an earmark too. At this point, it looks like there'll probably be maybe up to $50,000 match that we'll have to do from the town, but it'll get high-efficiency heat pumps that'll supply the heat and AC for the whole senior center. So that's one building down.
Nice.
So I was glad that we got that.
I was glad we didn't need air conditioning here tonight.
Yeah, I
Open the window.
I do not have good news on that one yet.
Yeah, I figured since you didn't
Next week
mention
we
it,
would,
that
though.
it probably wasn't.
There is some good news on that, though, actually, because I did get the bids in. We had the boilers went out over at the library. Bids came in the $240,000 range. The low bid, I think, was $243,000. We have been working with Plymouth County American Rescue Plan Act funds for this, and it does look like that it's going to be covered. So we should be able to get that project resolved, and hopefully the AC units in this building resolved, and be able to use those funds to cover it.
Well, that would be great.
Yeah, that'll be a big burden off of our capital plan, so keep our fingers crossed.
And on the topic of liaison reports, as we enter into budget season, I'll send out the liaison list again, and then we can decide as a group if we want to switch around or if we want to stay with our department head relationships. But we can talk about that in future meetings. There was no correspondence. We're not meeting next week, but we will have a meeting scheduled day of the special town meeting at the school. Room to be determined once I find that out. And And then thereafter, you know, you guys, we're moving into budget season, so we'll start meeting more regularly here soon. Oh, that's a good test. October 14th, Saturday, I believe 7 PM.
9 a.m.
9 a.m. in the morning. Oh, I would have been late. 9 a.m., so October 14th, 9 a.m. Thanks for the test.
And I will have posted in rooms reserved from
Yeah.
8 o'clock.
We'll meet at 8.
Oh, 8, jeez.
Maybe there'll be coffee and donuts outside, I don't know.
All right, cool. Anything else, guys? All right,
Motion
very
to
good.
adjourn.
Oh,
Second.
gosh, I was about to leave. So a motion is to adjourn. It's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And we are adjourned.
Chris.
Thanks.